Chapter 1700. In the command center of the Naxxrama's alliance, every leader, including Duque, stood up. They could not hide the shock on their faces. What the hell was this? Cannonballs could not penetrate, and even the Titan's energy could not affect it? Why don't you just fly in the sky? Suddenly, the door to the command center opened. Tyron was still in the position of pushing the door open. Duque could see that there was something wrong with Tyron's eyes. Her pupils had also turned white. It was not the white of the scara, but a strange kind of white that could be distinguished from the scara of her eyes. That psychedelic glow made Duque think of a possibility. Duke Marcus, Arthas is going all out. That is, the Lich King's domain. As soon as this tyrant spoke, Duque knew who she was. Elune? Yes, the situation is a bit urgent. I attached a little of my will to my high priest. Sorry, Elune said. Duque narrowed his eyes. He realized that there was something that Elune did not want to talk about through divine descent like before. He asked tentatively, domain? Of course, Duque knew what a domain was. He was just not sure if the domain he knew was the same as the one in front of him. Look at the sky, Tyrant, who was possessed by Elune, said loudly. Everyone looked at the open skylight. There was still a dark cloud above their heads. Nothing. Wait. This evil aura was getting thicker and thicker. Elune smiled bitterly. Finally found out? I just found out. It seems that we have all underestimated Arthas. In fact, he is opening the largest canopy of the undead in history. From the day you set foot on this continent to prepare for the punitive expedition against him, he has been carrying out this step. Wait, if it is the canopy of the undead. Duque was confused. He is hiding very well, pretending to be defeated. In fact, while you are consuming the Scourge's troops, you are also helping him spread the aura of the undead into the sky. Once this huge canopy of the undead is completed, all the creatures shrouded under the canopy will be forced to gradually transform into undead. All the dead skeletons and wandering souls would be completely transformed into higher-level undying beings. Just now, Arthas finally launched the sky screen. Duque didn't say anything. He noticed that Elune had used the word ruthless. Look. Elune pointed with her finger. Countless undyings appeared in many of the videos. They emerged from the crevices of the cliffs, from beneath the snow, from the tiles of the ice-crowned fortress, and from the cracks in the decorations of the fortress walls. Originally, the undyings would have appeared as ambushers and caught the attackers off guard. Apparently, they didn't know what had happened. They actually ran out of control. This is, Elune said with certainty, I was right. Activating such a wide canopy of undead far exceeds the upper limit of the Lich King's control, so the price is that Arthas has to give up 99% of his undead subordinates. It was no exaggeration to say that the Doomsday Army was in a state of collapse and chaos. Since he had paid such a heavy price, Arthas's only choice was to try his best to recoup his losses. Magni clenched his teeth. Good. Arthas is ruthless. At this moment, Arthas's sole voice resounded in the sky. Have you finally found out? Unfortunately, it's too late. The great kingdom of the undead is already under construction. You will all become my people, my slaves. Don't even think about it. Servanas scolded. It's too late. Perhaps you demigods are immune to my death curse, but as long as you are immortal, you will not be able to escape from my palm. Even if you leave Northrend now, the death curse will still accompany you and accelerate the countdown of your life. When you return to your warm homes in Lordaeron to reunite with your families, you will become the most ferocious undead, bringing your family, your friends, and your loved ones into the kingdom of the undead. Arthas's huge, illusory head laughed maniacally in the sky above the ice-crowned fortress. He took off his helmet that symbolized terror and revealed his original appearance. Arthas, who used to be so handsome, now had a head of white hair that looked like a dead man's. His face was firm and well-defined, and now every curve of his face was full of evil and madness. His cheeks trembled, and the stubble on his chin looked like the hand of a devil. It's not too late. Tyrant, who was possessed by Elune, pointed at the ice-crowned fortress. As long as I defeat you before this canopy of undead is completed, everything will end. Hearing Ilun's shout, Arthas stopped his maniacal laughter. He suddenly said, "Yes. Come in. Come into my stage of righteousness and evil. Only the performers who stood on this stage could truly hurt the other party. Come, Duke Marcus. Come. Fools who think of themselves as righteous, let us fight it out in the ice-crowned fortress." With that, Arthas's huge illusory head disappeared. Jaina pondered for a moment. "I think I understand what that damned realm of his is. Only those who are righteous or evil can enter. Those who are not on the stage cannot interfere with those on the stage. That's about it. Damn it, the Alliance's greatest advantage in long-range attacks has been nullified." Everyone was a little annoyed. They had originally wanted to fire their cannons and bombard the Alliance. But now, it didn't seem like it would work. "Oh, ha, ha." Duque chuckled at first, then turned into laughter. "Ilun, you possess Tyron because you have started to suppress the expansion of the canopy of undead in the air, right?" "Yes, that's right. I'll leave the sky to you." Ilun reminded, "All right. However, the magic formation formed by the 7 nodes must be preserved. Otherwise, Arthas can switch back at any time and replenish his mana through the magical veins under the ice-crowned fortress. Then Jaina and Kale, that's the 7 of you stay here." "Understood. Understood." Duke turned his head, his fierce gaze sweeping across every leader's face. "Everyone, what the Allied army is going to do has never changed from the beginning. Since Arthas desires destruction, we will grant him destruction. Alliance heroes. Attack." "Oh." In the command center, every Alliance leader raised their fists high. Thousands of Alliance professionals formed an assault team around the ice-crowned fortress. They rushed in from all directions and launched a fierce attack on the wandering undead. At the same time, Duque led the experts of the Alliance to the Avenue of Death in front of the ice-crowned fortress. Chapter 1701. There was no need for Duque and the rest to take action personally. The first wave of the Allied army's charge had already been launched. Darian Mograin's huge rune sword slashed down, and the Death Knights of the Black Edge Knights charged directly from the west side of the ice-crowned fortress. The steep mountain terrain could not stop the skeletal warhorses under them from leaping over cliffs as if they were walking on flat ground. As long as it was not a 90-degree vertical slope, these undead horses could perform acrobatic moves under the mental control of the man and horse as one. On the east side, the Silver Hand Knights also launched an attack. This was because the 2 gods of the Silver Hand, Gavin Rad and Theon, wanted to join the hero squad. This time, the Silver Hand was decisively handed over to the standard second-generation paladins, led by the 2 female paladins, Mara Fordragon and Lena Thunderspear. For a moment, Duque was a little worried. But then Duque felt relieved. After all, these 2 were in history with Trajan, and their statues were stored side by side in the Paladin Profession Hall as a memorial. If not for the fact that there were too many paladins in the Alliance and that they were too strong, without the 2 ancient gods holding the fort, these second-generation paladins would probably have taken over long ago. Now it seemed that the female paladins of the Alliance were also very fierce. The Silver Hand led by the 2 female paladins was like a sharp knife cutting through butter, easily destroying the Scourge soldiers who had lost the direct command of the Lich King. A hammer to the left and a holy seal to the right. Even playing polo was not as satisfying. Unfortunately, the Alliance Hero Squad could no longer accommodate so many paladins. In addition to these 2, there were also more famous and strong paladins like Riadaline, Marad, and Iriel the Hoof. Well, the Alliance did not have many things, but the Paladin Hero Squad had a lot of them. If it were an ordinary profession, the one who would clear the field the fastest would definitely not be the mage. But after the Radiant Moon, no one could compare to Pharaoh. Oh ha! In front of the Hero Squad, a dwarf shot out arcane impact with his short arms in turn, smashing the undead blocking the ice-crowned fortress into pieces. He was Millhouse Mana Storm. Originally, Duque did not want this guy to join the Hero Squad. However, not only did this guy recommend himself, but he also said that he wanted to get a spaceship for interstellar travel. Because of this fellow's erratic personality, Duque would never place him in a position that required a steady personality like guarding the magic formation. However, it would be a waste not to use a peak radiant moon pharaoh, so he might as well use this as an excuse to ask the Draenei on his behalf. In the end, it was as if this guy was on steroids and had a strong desire to show off. Of course, he alone would not be able to clear thousands of undead. In front of the hero team, there were two elite teams leading the way. They were the champions of the Alliance and the Horde who had shown in the Crusade. Sal had made up his mind to preserve his strength, but a group of his subordinates could not hold him back and took the initiative to ask for battle. Duque gave Sal a call. Proved. Humph. I've killed 18. I have 30. You have the nerve to show off to me after slaughtering the weakest skeleton? We're just elite monsters. Alliance warrior Sakagar bickered with Horde warrior Nahawk Steelbreaker, his hands not holding back at all. In any case, their main task was to open the way for the hero squad, and it was up to them how far they could go. Seeing them, Duque did not expect Tyrion to say with emotion, "It's good to be young." Duque rolled his eyes. "You can come to me and get eternal life." Tyrion was silent. Duque did not try to persuade him. After all, Anduin Lothar had chosen to end the last of the Arthi royal bloodline through natural death. It was not only to open the way for future generations, but also to set a noble example. Even though Lothar was not a paladin, the paladins had always unconsciously used him and Wother Lightbringer as role models. So, looks like I'll have to wait until Return of the Legion to persuade them. People can change and fate can be changed. Duque had already done so much and gained so much success. He had to do his best to save this world that could be destroyed at any time. Walking up the long staircase sandwiched between two high platforms with goat horns, they stepped onto the huge platform that overlooked half of the Icecrown Glacier. Stepping on the ferocious-looking skeleton relief, they looked at the huge corridor that was more than 50 meters tall, and looked at the statues of evil spirits on both sides that emitted violent flags. Everyone in the hero squad cast their eyes on the huge vortex at the end of the corridor. It was a teleportation portal. Arthas had activated her domain, rendering long-range attacks ineffective and protecting the entire Icecrown fortress from the attacks of cannons. However, the real interior of the Icecrown fortress was behind this teleportation portal that was full of unknown things. At the entrance, everyone stopped and looked at Duque. At this moment, other than Jaina and Kale, that's who were in charge of guarding the 7 teleportation points, as well as a group of second-rate mages like Solarian, it could be said that the strongest people in the Alliance were here. In addition, there was also Lord Howl in his heroic spirit state and Varrock Salyafar. "Let's go. Let's end this," Duque said calmly. He gently reached out to the teleportation portal and used his demigod power to connect to the already stable teleportation portal. He was making sure that his group would not be teleported to some unknown place. Duque did not notice that Theon was tightly gripping the hilt of Ashbringer in his hand. After a short teleportation, the scene in front of them made the heroes murmur. Everywhere was filled with an evil icy mist, the bone-chilling floor, the ominous statues that always stared at people, and the huge chandelier that seemed like it could fall at any time and crush people to death. Everything gave people a feeling of fear and unease, but there were no enemies. This is the final battlefield, right? Arthas is not qualified to be the host. Even if there's number 21 gun salute, at least a few skeleton soldiers can come and play grave disco to liven things up. Gavin Rad whistled frivolously. This, of course, attracted the chuckles of many heroines. Only Theon frowned. Gavin Rad, all right. Don't take it too seriously. You're just too serious. You're so young but your hair is already moving upward. The veins on Theon's forehead bulged, the cross-shaped veins as obvious as they could be. One had to know that he was just over 50, and with a head of slightly orange hair and a full beard, he was considered a handsome man in the Alliance. On the contrary, although Gavin Rad was a handsome man when he was young, he had the momentum of developing into Mr. Mediterranean. If not for Duque teaching him to tie his hair in a bun, his image would be ruined. Just as Theon was about to explode, he suddenly remembered and smiled bitterly. "Thanks, brother." Chapter 1702. Those who were not directly involved would never understand the friendship between the 5 silver saints that people spoke of. This relationship had spanned a quarter of a century and had never faded, let alone been forgotten. As staunch believers of the Holy Light, they had wondered if they would die before they could fight the orcs and be destroyed by the high concentration of the Holy Light. After all, at that time, the Holy Knight was only a profession that existed in the theories of Archbishop Alonso's Fale. Azeroth had been recorded for 2,800 years. Was it that easy to be the first in recorded human history? Absolutely not. On the night before the change, although they had absolute trust in Alonso's, they still followed their teacher's instructions and left a will. For the next 14 years, they fought on all fronts. They had thought that they would die on the battlefield, under the axes of the orcs, under the claws of the demons, or even under a terrible curse. But none of them had thought that they would die in the hands of their own disciple. Gavin, Rad, and Theon, the brothers around them, knew better than them how much Uther had invested in Arthas. The most painstaking teaching, the most magnificent teaching assistants, and the most perfect training lineup. What Uther wanted to teach was the perfect next generation of holy knights that combined all the strengths of the 5 of them. Unfortunately, with the success of Nizul's plot, not only did everything come to nothing, even their most respected brother, Uther, was killed. Did they hate Arthas? The answer was absolutely yes. This was definitely not pure hatred, because pure hatred would only make the Holy Light covered in dust. This would make them completely deviate from the path of the Holy Light. The 4 of them were more eager than anyone else to end things with Arthas, the Lich King. Even after the disappearance of Sidon and Turalyon, Theon and Gavin Rad firmly believed that if they were still alive, they would definitely continue to have the same feelings. In the face of the impending danger of Azeroth again and again, they were willing to obey orders to deal with the enemies in front of them first. This did not mean that they had forgotten about Uther and Arthas, who was still at large. The Holy Knight was not a profession that used the Holy Light to encompass everything. In addition to holy and protection, the Holy Knight also had the most important punishment. There was also a key skill called reckoning. Today, here now, this was the day of reckoning for the 4 silver saints. 2 stalwart figures walked in front of the group, one on the left and one on the right. One of them was carrying the Dorleth Ashbringer, and the other was carrying the harpoon-like Windchaser sword. The surging energy rippling from the 2 divine weapons seemed to confirm the excitement of their owners. Looking at them, Duque pursed his lips. Duque knew that he was not the star of the show today. There were no enemies in the cold and deep corridors and palaces. Perhaps, even Arthas knew that it was impossible for the Calamity soldiers to overwhelm this hero team with numbers. This was because Duque was one of the experts who had entered the Ice Crown Fortress. Along the way, Duque constantly relied on the system elf to analyze everything in this domain. He was surprised to find that Arthas didn't restrict his access to the elements, and even allowed him to extend the weave into Ice Crown Castle. This made Duque deeply suspicious. What was Arthas up to? It was only after reaching the 5th floor that there were changes. Very abruptly, the scene in front of every hero's eyes was cut apart. More than 10 black lines cut everything in their field of vision into pieces. This wasn't an illusion. Space was really being cut apart. "Protect yourselves," Duque shouted sternly. This shout was actually just instinctive. The moment space was cut apart, it was already destined that the sound transmitted through the air would not reach the ears of the hero team. Duque waved a "shh" and immediately discovered that a strong suction force was sucking him to a huge square. Originally, Duque didn't want to follow the other party's wishes. When he sensed the other party's aura, Duque changed his mind. In the darkness, a square entered Duque's vision at high speed. The ground was covered with patterns of skulls, the dark green carvings, the surrounding towering pillars, and the layers of concentric patterns that looked like chrysanthemums in the middle of the square made Duque immediately realize where he was. Wow, that's interesting. He's actually welcoming me in the territory of his dead wife. This was indeed a part of the Ice Crown Fortress. It turned out that here, the players would face Maligo's wife, Syndagosa, who had turned into an ice dragon. Unexpectedly, after Syndagosa was beaten to a pulp, the one guarding this place would be Malygos, who only had half a body left. Yo, Malygos, you want to deal with me alone? You think too highly of yourself, don't you? Get Earthies out here. Duque had a smile on his lips, his expression full of mockery. Malygos opened his mouth, which was basically only left with bones. The dragon's mouth, which was barely attached to dry lips and muscles, let out a furious roar of the soul. Despicable thief! I still have a score to settle with you. Don't worry, you won't have the chance to meet the great Lich King. Faced with Malygos' anger, Duque didn't care. He scratched his head. If you can come at me together, why do you have to die one by one? You're courting death again. Malygos didn't fully understand what he said. But Duque's contempt was real. Du-ku, the terrifying dragon's roar shook the entire palace. Countless icicles that were originally frozen on the pillars and decorations of the main hall's plaza fell down one after another and fell to the ground with a crisp, ping sound. It wasn't just Duque. Almost the entire team of heroes had been torn apart by the spatial trap just now. When he fell from the sky, what appeared in front of him was a huge monster that could tentatively be called humanoid, 6 stories tall. It stood on 2 legs, with only 2 toes on one leg and 4 on the other. The left claw had 3 withered bones, and the right had 4 palms still wrapped in rotten flesh. Its left shoulder was a huge mouth. Wrapped in fangs, there was something that looked like a scapula. On the huge right arm, there were 2 crooked arms. Its facial features were also very random. One eye was at the back of its head, one was below the crooked left corner of its mouth, and several more eyes were on its belly, arms, back, and other places. Obviously, this was another disgusting monster stitched with forbidden black magic. If Duque were here, he would definitely recognize this as one of the bosses of Ice Crown Fortress, Rotten Intestines. On the other side, Gavin Rad was equally dumbfounded. F***CK, I'm about to throw up the bread I ate last night. Unfortunately, he encountered Rotten Intestines' brother, Rotten Noodles. Chapter 1703. F***CK, I'm about to throw up the bread I ate last night. Unfortunately, he met Rotten Intestines' brother, Rotten Noodles. In addition, William encountered the undead creature, Lord Malorger, which had 4 skulls. Magni against Lady Fallen Whisperer. Elucia and Curia to Professor Putterside. The highlight was when the 3 demigods fell in front of the frozen throne. Onyxia, Vashch, and Sylvanas, the 3 demigods could be said to be the strongest in the alliance apart from Duque. Oh, what a good plan. So the Lich King only knows how to bully women? The human form Onyxia swung her long black hair with her right hand and put on a charming expression. On the frozen throne, Arthas did not move at all. After taking off his helmet, his pale face showed a rare look of ridicule. The great Azeroth guardian dragon actually has the cheek to say that you're a woman? Sure, I'll open a portal for you. You can leave Ice Crown Fortress by yourself. After saying that, Arthas actually opened a portal surrounded by a frosty aura. The top of the portal reflected the scenery outside. As long as Onyxia stepped out of the portal, she would be able to return to the Alliance's camp near the Castle of Evil. The problem was, would the Black Dragon Princess dare to do so? She had finally made a name for herself under Duque and developed from a pitiful mount to a harem. If she dared to escape on her own, Duque would peel off her dragon's skin and beat it like a drum. Glancing at the side, she saw the silent Sylvanas and Vashch, who was quietly watching her performance in a maid's uniform. Vashch aside, Sylvanas would never abandon Arthas, his opponent, and leave. If Duque was here, there would still be Duque to suppress Sylvanas. The main point was that Duque wasn't here. 15 years after the Door of Darkness, the calamity of the Eversong Forest, the destruction of the old Silvery Moon City, and the deaths of millions of his compatriots. Although the betrayal of the Sun King played a part, ultimately, it was still because the Calamity army led by the culprit, Arthas, was too strong. Now, Nizul, the mastermind, and Arthas, the culprit, had merged into one. Sylvanas, who was determined to take revenge and had even changed her race's name to Blood Elf, would never let go of such an opportunity. Looking at the lightning snakes that were constantly jumping around her body, it was obvious that she was ready to fight. Onyxia did not know how strong Arthas was, but looking at his, Frostmourn's fury, she knew that she would definitely not be able to defeat Arthas. She didn't think that any of the three of them could stop the Lich King. She only knew that if she really ran, Sylvanas might be dead. How could Duque spare her then? The hesitation only lasted for a moment. In the next moment, she caressed her face and teased, "Oh, so annoying. Such a small portal, you want to send away, who?" When she said the last two words, not only did Onyxia's voice become stern, she also transformed into her original form, the fearsome black dragon princess. "Sister Sylvanas, if you don't mind, how about we fight the enemy together? Ignore the one in the maid uniform." "Okay." In the next second, Sylvanas turned into a stream of light and disappeared on the spot. When she reappeared, she was already standing on the back of Onyxia's neck. If there was a fatal weakness for a dragon, it would be here. There would not be any other place. Because this was the most difficult place for a dragon to take care of. Vashj laughed faintly, and at the same time, she also turned into a six-armed naga. In the past, she would always hold a bow, but this time, her 6 slender arms were all close combat weapons. Nagas were not only sharp archers and mages, but also the sharpest close combat experts at the same time. Arthas was probably smiling, but the smile on her face was getting more and more radiant. Yet, for some reason, it gave off the feeling that it was a fake smile that didn't reach the eyes. He did not put on his helmet and just stood up, holding Frostmourne, and walked down his ice throne step by step. At the same time, the most shrill alarm suddenly sounded in Naxxramas. "Not good. Our spatial portal has been unlocked for some reason." A radiant moon mage cried out. "Got it." Without saying much, Jaina took off her coat and quietly put on her epic-grade cloak. When she slowly walked in front of the portal in the center of Naxxramas with her staff in hand, dozens of translucent, illusory skeletal palms appeared out of thin air. After an ear-piercing sound that was almost like scraping glass, the last barrier in front of the portal was completely destroyed. An incomparably dark door opened, and a great lich with a head that was completely different from its body stepped out of the portal. "How disappointing. So the Alliance left you here to die?" The one who came was the former Sun King, Anastrian. Jaina's expression was incomparably calm. She had a look of understanding on her face. "Anastrian, do you really think we didn't expect you to attack Naxxramas?" As Jaina's voice fell, the portal behind the Sun King suddenly made a crisp, crack sound. 1/10 of a second later, the portal he opened was crushed by an illusory red dragon claw that suddenly appeared. Less than 3 meters behind him, the humanoid red dragon sister appeared with her hands on her waist, standing there lazily. The name of the Dragon King was the best interpretation of strength. The Red Dragon Queen teased, "Oh, Arthas didn't miscalculate the comparison of strength, did he? He actually dared to send you out?" It wasn't just Alexstrasza. Not far to the right of the Sun King, a portal formed by the swinging of fire elements opened, and a figure familiar to the Sun King stepped in. "Isn't this the son who betrayed me?" If the Sun King still had muscles on his face, this would be an extremely sarcastic and mocking smile. Unfortunately, a skull made of ice could not express any facial expressions. "Kale," that said softly, "I came today to make a final end to our relationship, father." JJJGA. The sound of the ice skull's upper and lower jaws constantly opening and closing was quite unpleasant to hear. Anastrian laughed. "Then to know. My child, as long as you are my child for a day, you will always be my child. You can't get rid of the destiny that I have bestowed upon you." The Sun King spoke with such certainty that it gave Kale that's an ominous premonition. Could it be that this former father of hers had some sort of backup plan? Chapter 1704. Haha. Alexstrasza was the first to laugh wildly. "Haha. Bones, so you didn't become a lich, but a clown? What a good joke. I haven't heard such a funny joke in 20,000 years. The Red Dragon Big Sis smiled beautifully. One could see the outline of her exposed abdomen. Jaina's face was cold, and she spat out her venomous tongue mercilessly. Enough. Anastrian, your dirty soul that betrayed your people has no right to talk about inheritance and the fate of your descendants. From the moment you sold your soul to the Lich King, you are nothing but a pile of smelly bones. Only Kale, that's the former prince who used to smile gently and elegantly, now had a gloomy expression. But his clenched fists and the few arcane fireballs spinning faster and faster behind him revealed the excitement and resentment in his heart. Only the Sun King seemed to be sizing up his surroundings with the ghost fire in his icy eye sockets. The Red Dragon Queen finished laughing. She put her hands on her hips and raised her head. Did Arthas miscalculate something? Did he think that by giving you the skull of a divine artifact, he could make you a real demigod? Or do you think that you are my mash? The Red Dragon Queen puffed out her chest proudly. As the leader of the Pentashade Dragon Kings, she had her own pride. She did not think that the Sun King was her match. Anastrian seemed to be laughing. Ha! If we fight face to face, I am indeed not your match, big lizard. The Red Dragon Queen raised her eyebrows and puffed out her cheeks. Her anger was easy to understand. Sure enough, he changed the topic. But who wants to fight you face to face? Perhaps you still don't know why I want to use Naxxramas as a breakthrough point? Jaina's eyes were half closed. He was right. If he attacked the magic vein nodes guarded by the Radiant Moon mages, he might be able to severely injure them with the first blow. Jaina said coldly, because Naxxramas used to be a fortress belonging to the Scourge, right? What a pity. This fortress has been completely remodeled by me and Duke. The Sun King raised the gray index finger of his right hand and shook it proudly. No. Even the Lich King himself doesn't know the true use of Naxxramas. Actually, this floating fortress isn't a real fortress. At this point, he deliberately kept them in suspense. Even though the two Breaking Dawn mages were vaguely eager to hear the rest of the story, they remained clear-headed and had already stealthily reinforced their magical defenses. Jaina further confirmed the Weave's control over Naxxramas. The Sun King smiled, and the upper and lower jaws of the ice skeleton once again made an uncomfortable and frightening quack sound. Naxxramas was originally used as a prisoner's carriage to describe it in a more convenient way. The moment Anastrian uttered the last word, he activated the spell he had been hiding for a long time. Without giving Alexstrasza any time to react, countless rays of light suddenly shot out from the void and crossed the space, forming dazzling chains that directly locked onto her robust body. The Red Dragon Queen let out a rare cry of surprise. No longer caring that this was a rather narrow teleportation hall for her, she brazenly activated the ultimate transformation spell. Who knew? Almost at the same time that her limbs and neck thickened, the chains actually became thicker and larger at the same time. They tightly bound her body, and a purer Titan energy burst forth. Not good. Quick, stop him. From the left and right, the blazing fire element and the bone-chilling frost element combined to form the most powerful frost-fire arrow, which poured fiercely onto the Sun King's body. For Jaina and Kale, this was the safest way to fight. The original Sun King must have specialized in the fire element. When the two of them saw the ice skeleton that imprisoned Nizul, they couldn't be sure. After all, the Lich King's signature element was frost. Since they could not be sure, they simply used the Frostfire arrow. That was because this mystical spell would cause the most damage based on which element the opponent had the weakest resistance to. In order to deal with today's battle, the two had spent a long time practicing. But it did not seem to be effective. The Sun King let out a hair-raising sound like an owl. The extremely exaggerated ice shield on his body, with at least 30 layers, firmly resisted the joint casting of the two. At the same time, he continued to drag the Red Dragon Queen into this mysterious prison. Jaina and Kale, faces were as white as a sheet. They had miscalculated. Just as no one said it, no one would know that Otter's true purpose was to imprison the ancient gods, and the rest were secondary purposes. Used to seeing Naxxramas flying around as a flying fortress, Who would know that this thing was originally used by the Titans to imprison dangerous species or local gods on a certain planet and transport them back to the Pantheon for research? Jaina gritted her teeth and suddenly shouted, "Torim!" A huge figure appeared almost in response. He punched through the wall of Naxxrama's teleportation hall, and his huge body, so huge that it was difficult for mortals to look up, squeezed into the teleportation hall. Torim, whose eyes were bursting with Titan energy and lightning, hammered down, and an explosive ball of lightning exploded where the Sun King stood. Unfortunately, he seemed to have activated Flash at the last moment and dodged it. Torim's rumbling voice echoed throughout the teleportation hall. "I didn't expect you to find such a loophole. Damn you, Malygos." Needless to say, to know such a top secret, it was definitely not the Sun King, who only had a lifespan of thousands of years. Only Malygos, who was also a guardian, would keep such a secret. Jaina's hands were not hesitant, and a series of spells followed. "Sun King, do you have the ability to lock all the guardians in the prison?" The Sun King could not help but feel a little bitter at this time. How is this possible? As the strongest dragon aspect, Alexstrasza's strength was definitely the top among the guardians. Unless it was the demon's soul that had her own soul back then, how could she be suppressed so easily? One dragon aspect was enough to give the Sun King a headache. However, the Sun King actually had a backup plan. But, since I have inherited Nzul's ice skeleton, it also means that I have inherited his huge mental power. With his evil words, an incomparably terrifying mental energy pressed toward Torim, Jaina, and Kale, that's at the same time. Chapter 1705. Even though Duque had already reminded them to prepare protection in this area, Jaina and Kale, that still felt overwhelmed. They both knew that this was under the premise that the Sun King did not use them as the main target. Torim, who was on the other side, was in the most pain. His huge body knelt down on both knees, his hands clutching his temples hard, and his mouth made indistinct sounds. Although most of the guards near the teleportation hall of the fortress had been secretly invited away, there were still some paladins here in order to avoid being discovered by the enemy that might invade. At this moment, all existences below the hero level let out painful howls. Jaina's forehead was full of cold sweat. She had to admit that she had miscalculated. Alexstrasza's mistake and being trapped was the biggest miscalculation. This meant that the strongest combat power on the Allied forces' side had been directly sealed, even if it was very likely to be temporary. Khadgar, do you hear me? Can you do anything?" Jaina urgently called for help through the magic net. "I have no choice. Perhaps no one in the Alliance is good at resisting mental attacks. But I know of one existence. Go!" Jaina shouted in the sea of consciousness. Inside Naxxrama's, a mental shock wave that was 100 times stronger than the raging waves repeatedly washed the nerves of every living creature in the fortress. Soldiers with weak mental strength had already begun to bleed from their eye sockets and ear holes. If this continued, a large number of people would die here. Tholth's face was pale, and he cried out in his heart that he had miscalculated. Duque had calculated that the Scourge army might use this former Scourge fortress to cause trouble, and even that an Astrian might come in person. Unfortunately, Duque had miscalculated the strength of this Sun King. No one had thought that Arthas would actually give the ice skeleton that Nzul had used before to the Sun King, making his strength so terrifying. In just a few seconds, the tens of thousands of soldiers in the entire fortress were completely paralyzed. Everyone almost suspected that it was not an Astrian who had come, but the real Lich King Arthas. At this moment, a female voice suddenly came from the void. The voice was clear and cold, but it gave people a sense of confusion. It was as if the voice was not a voice, but an auditory hallucination. It was this voice that instantly brought an Astrian's unending spiritual waves to a halt. It was the haze of day. It was a jade-colored dream. Jaina suddenly realized who she was. An illusory and beautiful green dragon head appeared in the air above the teleportation hall. Even though the head had shrunk a lot, everyone could easily recognize it as Isra. It's not that simple, is it? The Sun King spat and had no intention of retreating. Isra, who was in charge of the Emerald Dream, might not be able to leave due to the changes in the dream world. It was still possible for him to help out a little. After all, the ones here were not the undead who had been forced to step into the realm of the dead and had no resistance against mind control, but thousands of living humans with vibrant bodies and surging vitality. Even the demon of 1,000 throats, Yogg-Saron, who was also a master of mind control, did not dare to guarantee that he could control a guardian in an instant. Even for the other guardians who were betrayed by Loken, Yogg-Saron had to spend a long time peeking into the target's mind and breaking their hearts from their weaknesses before he could truly achieve a more perfect control. You have no chance. What awaits you is only eternal annihilation. Isra roared. The green dragon mouth opened, and a rainbow-like dragon breath that kept changing colors crossed the void and shot towards Anastrian. Annihilation? The only ones who will be annihilated will be you stubborn living beings who resist to the end. As soon as he finished speaking, the upper and lower jaws of his ice skull opened and closed in a strange manner. It should be laughing. A huge ice coffin appeared. The other two Breaking Dawn archmages wanted to treat it as ice barrier. Although they were both within the scope of magic, the nature of this huge ice cube was not that kind of thing. The Sun King's main body was like a salted fish sealed in ice. His entire skeleton was completely sealed by the ice, and every possible place where he could move was completely sealed. Jaina, Kale, and Khadgar, the three great pharaohs' faces paled at the same time. Using an ice coffin made of extremely pure ice elemental essence to seal himself in was not necessarily the best form of protection. Normal archmages could only maintain ice barrier for 10 seconds at most. The demigod Lich was obviously not restricted by this. As long as the outside world could not break through this ice coffin of such purity and hardness, he could basically stay in it for as long as he wanted. But everyone present could feel that the Sun King was using this method to protect his body. At the same time, he was spreading his spiritual power everywhere and beginning to invade the fortress magic net system. "Stop him!" Kale, shouted in shock. As one of the few pharaoh in the alliance, the former elven prince also used the magic net. After all, the magic net was too convenient and efficient. However, he was very clear about his own identity. So, although he had a very high level of use, he did not have the right to control it. The highest level of control of the magic net was naturally in the hands of Duque, and the second level was in the hands of Khadgar and Jaina. Now, they were shocked to find that Anastrian was actually thinking of Naxxrama's magic net node. They were really shocked and angry. The core of the magic net was in Karazhan, and the second-level nodes were Naxxrama's and the Dalajan. The main cities of the Alliance were the third-level nodes. If Naxxrama's was taken, and Duque was not there at this critical juncture, there was no guarantee that Anastrian would have an even bigger idea. He could use spiritual control to invade the magic net, and even control the entire magic net and Karazhan, which could be used as a channel to cross astral planes. Without Kale, reminder, Jaina was already doing it. But she retreated from the teleportation hall like lightning to a medium-sized magic control node at least a kilometer away from the central area. As soon as she entered the magic net, she found that she could not stop it at all. A human could coordinate and control their own hands and feet, but how many more hands and feet would they have? This was no longer a situation that could be described as flustered. Her mind was immersed in the magic net. Even though Jaina had extremely high authority, she could only command a few spiritual energy balls at the same time to attack, suppress, and counter the spiritual invasion of the Sun King. Now, there were at least 1,000 spiritual attacks on the magic net at the same time. Even though this was the control node on the periphery of the magic net, Jaina already had the illusion that her territory was falling inch by inch, and she could do nothing about it. Chapter 1706. Multitasking. 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 These were the same concepts, but they were on completely different levels. At best, Jaina could multitask. Dealing with 10 or so people at once was already her limit. Karthika had been dead for 26 years. He had been shocked by Duque's 100 hands, and by spreading out his spirit to read multiple books in Karazhan's library, he had trained his spellcasting abilities. After so many years of training, Karthika had turned himself into a super spirit world creature that could do hundreds of conflicting things at the same time without messing things up. Karthika's abilities were already very exaggerated. What was more hateful was that the ice skeleton kill Jaden had personally created gave Anastrian the ability to control more than 1,000 spiritual energy beams to attack the weave. No, we can't hold on any longer. In the weave, Jaina and Karthika cried out in despair at the same time. Karthika had called for help, the Dark Witch Farina and the great Astromancer Solarin. Not enough. A drop in the bucket. Jaina gritted her teeth. Open up access to all Morning Star and above wizards in the Alliance, and ask for their help. Don't hesitate. No matter how bad it is, it's better than being taken away by an Astrian. At most, I'll go ask for forgiveness from Duque. Jaina made the final decision. In the next second, Jaina's voice rang through the entire weave. I am Queen Jaina Proudmoore of Kull, Tiras. The weave is now under attack by the former Sun King, an Astrian Sunstrider. I request all weave users to help repel his attack. On the other side, Jaina was trying her best to resist the Sun King's spiritual attack. On the other side, Kale, had summoned his phoenix. He risked self-destruction to merge with his phoenix once more, obtaining the power of a demigod. This was because his dead father's ice coffin was getting bigger and bigger, and he had no choice but to use high-purity fire elemental magic to resist the expansion of the ice. Beside him, Torim had already retreated. Under this level of spiritual attack, he could not do anything at all. That damned lich. Torim cursed fiercely. This was because the flaw in his mind had already been found, and the illusion of his deceased wife was constantly attacking his spiritual sea. It was unknown if Anastrian had been forced to switch from playing with fire to playing with ice, resulting in some unknown flaw. He also attacked Kale, but his mental attacks were mostly neutralized by Kale, blazing mental fire. The situation suddenly entered a stalemate. Otter's guardians were all mentally flawed. If Torim could not handle it, then the other three were even more so. It would be hilarious if Freya were to come up and be forcibly controlled to betray them. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Sun King alone was holding up 6 demigods and 2 Breaking Dawn powerhouses. Perhaps we've all underestimated the Lich King. Jaina could not help but think of her childhood friend. The fierce battle continued in Ice Crown Fortress. Be careful! Just as William shouted, Valilla, who was beside him, leaped away. Almost at the same time that the female elf dodged, a terrifying storm descended. Lord Malorger, an undead creature with green soul matter as its core and white bones as its support, brazenly unleashed a skill similar to Whirlwind Slash. The white bone spikes that were fixed on the soul energy ball suddenly opened up and spun at a high speed. It looked more like a terrifying blender. Everything that was touched by the white bone would be crushed into pieces. What made William's scalp tingle was that after Lord Malorger unleashed Bone Storm, he was advancing towards Brawlbearskin, who had just been hit by a huge Lord of Calamity's thorn. A huge bone spike had pierced through this elven druid's waist. It was unknown if Brawl's internal organs had exploded. No matter who it was, being pierced through the abdomen by such a 2-meter-long bone spike that was as thick as a human thigh would definitely be in excruciating pain. Even under such extreme pain, Brawl was still yelling for William to ignore him. William gritted his teeth and leaped high, finally using his precious leap slash skill to smash the bone spike on Brawl's body. Actually, he had unknowingly made the right decision. Almost at the same time that he destroyed the bone spike, Brawl rolled to the side and dodged the bone storm of the undead leader. Blood splattered all over the ground, and William could see an organ that looked like a pig's kidney almost falling out of the big hole in Brawl's waist. Brawl's eyes were sharp, and he quickly scooped it up. No need to look. He won't die just yet. Valilla pulled Varian back. Although Brawl's face was extremely pale, his chanting and his hand gestures were not messed up at all. A ball of emerald light rose from his palms, and he pressed it onto his abdomen. The huge bloody hole started to heal at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. In just 3 to 5 seconds, the bloody hole disappeared, and in its place was a new belly. Brawl laughed bitterly. I just barely managed to get my organs back in place. I need at least 3 minutes to recover about 30% of my battle power. William's hands trembled and he clenched his teeth. Leave this battle to us. In countless life and death battles, Brawl had guarded their backs. This time, it was their turn to protect this respectable brother of theirs. William merged the two divine weapons in his hands, forming a huge divine sword. His sharp gaze swept across Lord Malorger's body. For skulls are not enough. You better have 1,000 heads for me to chop off. In the next second, he turned into a strong gust of wind and blew towards the huge undead leader. On the other side, in a hall filled with skulls, Magni and Chandri's Feathermoon were fighting against the Church of the Cursing's Lady Deathspeaker. The flames from the Balrog's warhammer engulfed a huge humanoid monster that was as tall as 3 people. However, more monsters continued to pour out from the side doors on both sides of the hall. More than 10 supporters and zealots of the Church of the Cursing chased after the seemingly weak General Feathermoon. She was over 10,000 years old, but because she was Tyron's adopted daughter, she was a generation lower. While Tyron was talking to the leaders of the Alliance as equals, Chandri's was rather bitter. It was destined that she could only vent her frustrations in battle. Even though she was being chased by more than 10 powerful believers of the Church of the Cursing, this elven general who was in charge of guarding one side of the hall lightly stepped on a pillar 3 times and flew into the air. Chapter 1707. Chandri's twisted her body in midair and shot an arrow. Her next move was almost mistaken as a Naga's. Mortals couldn't shoot 3 arrows simultaneously, or 5 rounds of 15 arrows in a second. What was more terrifying was that the arrows were shot at the ceiling of the hall. When they flew in midair, they actually split into pieces. The fanatical believers looked up at the densely packed light spots. After they hit the ceiling of the hall, they did not bounce randomly. Instead, under the influence of a mysterious power, they were reflected back at a predetermined angle. The arrows whistled through the air and easily pierced through the bodies of the believers. In an instant, the side of the hall seemed to rain blood. The entire side of the hall looked like it had been plowed by Zhu Beiji's rake. Several rows of cursed believers fell. Lady Deathwhisper waved her skeletal hand. The believers who had just fallen into the realm of death stood up slowly. They were already immortals. Oh! Seeing their companions stand up again, the fanatical believers all let out excited voices. Immortality! Immortality! This was their greatest pursuit. The Feathermoon general sneered at the brainwashed undead. As she raised her arm, a rain of dazzling purple ribbons streaked across the void and shrouded the undead's heads. In the next second, the newly born immortals who had not fully climbed up had already turned into a pile of rotten flesh and blood. You want to be immortal forever? This is the immortality you want. Chandri spat on the ground. Unexpectedly, Lady Deathwhisper raised her arms and shouted, "No one can escape from this world of death." Lady Deathwhisper used Mana Barrier to block Magni's attack right in front of Chandri's. Then she used Death's Wither on Chandri's. The stench of death spread out. Mortals would die just from smelling it. Even though Chandri's physique had greatly increased after entering the realm of hero, she still did not dare to take this attack head-on. To make matters worse, when she was rolling around, she was hit by a paralysis curse. She was a priestess and also a ranger, but she did not have a way to dispel the curse. At this moment, in this place where there was no profession that could dispel the curse, she could only take it head-on. Magni, have you settled it? Chandri's was not as easy to talk to as her adoptive mother Tyrant. He didn't care if his foster mother was Magni's equal or not. He would get angry when he needed to. Immediately. Magni was also having a headache. The lich in front of him was too stubborn. She actually dared to take on his Balrog hammer with her shield up. He had wanted to conserve his strength and use all his strength to hammer Arthas, but now he no longer held back. He crushed a bead in his pocket. This was a treasure the rock guardian Alcavan had given him, and it was filled with the purest earth element. Hiss! Magni was on drugs. The dead shorty had become a big shorty. Its body was as large as a giant's, and it possessed unparalleled and terrifying strength. Combined with its massive burning warhammer, Magni Bronzebeard had directly taught Mistress Deathwhisper a lesson. Shio. Shio. Her powerful frost arrow originally had terrifying lethality against any close-range combatant. At this moment, it was completely impossible. Bam. The shield was destroyed with a single strike. Bam. 2 strikes knocked them over. Bam. 3 strikes whipped the corpse. The opponent, who seemed to be evenly matched just a moment ago, was defeated by Magni in 3 moves. The disciples of the cursed god sect were scared out of their wits. When they screamed and tried to run away, Chandris shot them to death like she was shooting rabbits in a hunt. Every corpse was given a small bottle of holy water, and the corpses started to have an unexpected chemical reaction. The corpses, whose souls and bodies had been corroded by the darkness, started to melt as if they had been poisoned by the corpse dissolving water. Everything was done. Chandris looked at this giant that was 3 stories tall, and his width was even greater than his height. She couldn't help but put her hands on her waist and scolded, "Hey, why didn't you use it earlier? Hurry up and become small. We don't know what's going on with the others. We better hurry over." Magni glared. "It's not that simple. I have to expel the earth element out of my body if I want to become small. Once I do that, I won't dare to absorb it again. If the earth element is contaminated by the shadow energy, I will turn into a large death knight and smash you in the face." Chandris looked at the entrance of the hall that was too narrow for Magni and curled her lips. She was clearly saying, "Do as you see fit." Magni rolled his eyes. He could only expel half of the earth element. In the middle of the ice-crowned fortress, King Varrock Salyafar was swinging his axe and smashing his son, who had become a scourge death knight, at Dranos Salyafar. Behind the father and son, who were separated by life and death, was Grom Hellscream, who was silently watching the battle with Blood Howl. Lord Howl was silent. The father and son before him represented the greatest sin of the Scourge army. It was already sad enough that the old had to bury the young. Now, the father had to bury his son again and destroy him with his own hands. Ignoring the continuation of life and trampling on the ethics of the human world, this was the Lich King's doing. Grom basically didn't make a move unless he saw the mutated blood fiends summoned by young Salyafar. These inferior monsters could bully professionals who had just stepped into the realm of heroes, but against a top-tier hero like Grom, it was a piece of cake. What was even more amazing was that young Salyafar was a typical blood death knight. His moves were useless against Lord Roar, who was a pure energy creature. This gave Lord Howl more confidence to hold the line for Varrock. For the Lich King, poor child, not every small battlefield was dominated by the allied army. There were clear victories, and naturally, there were also those who were at a disadvantage. Although the allied army was the cream of the crop from tens of millions of people, those who could obtain a place in the Scourge army, which had hundreds of millions of undead soldiers, were not weak either. The entire ice-crowned fortress was filled with fierce battles. In the square of the hall that originally belonged to Syndagosa, Malygos attacked Duque with beautiful magic while provoking him with words. "Ha! Are you ready? Soon, you will see your Sylvanas transform into the queen of the undead. And that little female dragon of yours, and that filthy Naga." With a wave of his claws, Malygos summoned another terrifying ice storm. This was Ice-Crown Fortress, Arthas' home ground. In terms of dominating the ice element, the Lich King's faction had an absolute advantage. Duque didn't just use the fire element to fight against it. Chapter 1708. Arthas was sitting on a magical ley line, while Duke was using the wirelessly connected weave to exhaust his mana. There was a natural gap between them. Duque very cleverly summoned over 100 hands of magic and used Arcane Barrage to continuously defeat the icicles that were flying at him. When Malygos gave up control of the frost element, Duque slowly seized control and purified it with holy magic. "Ha! His Majesty the Lich King is already killing your woman. You stole His Majesty's woman, and now His Majesty is here to steal yours." Malygos kept spewing trash talk, which made Duque quite unhappy. Malygos was a madman. Duque had known for a long time. Not only was he arrogant and crazy, but he also had no integrity. In the battle of ancient times, if he hadn't let the weakened blue dragons attack Neltharion in a rage, the blue dragons wouldn't have been wiped out, and his wife wouldn't have died just like that. After his wife died, he was afraid that his wife's ghost would haunt him, so he let her grieve in the far north for 10,000 years. Later, when his wife's corpse came back to life, Malygos didn't clean up after himself. Instead, he had sex with a red dragon girl who could be his daughter in the magic pivot. He even played sadistic games and tortured her into insanity. Duque never knew why there were players who liked Malygos before he transmigrated in his previous life. Anyway, this guy might have been a bit like a dragon king before the battle of ancient times. After that battle, this guy didn't do anything good. Even in his experience, Duque couldn't find anything excusable. Malygos's mouth really angered Duque. Wasn't Duque afraid that Sylvanas would become the undead queen again? Of course he was. Before he transmigrated, Duque still had some longing for the valiant Sylvanas who wasn't queen, but now Duque didn't think about it at all. Who would want the woman who had been by his side for so many years, who was connected with him, and who was even willing to have children with him to suddenly become a cold and terrifying corpse? Get lost. Only a moron would be willing. To be honest, Duque couldn't wait to destroy Earthes as soon as possible. He wanted to completely eliminate this terrible possibility that was infinitely close to zero. There was a moment earlier when Duque still had a chance to break through Arthes's trap, or at least bring Sylvanas back to his side. But when Duque discovered that Sylvanas's fighting spirit had skyrocketed after sensing Arthes's aura, Duque decided to give up. If you love someone, you must accept all of them. Duque looked forward to the Queen of Greece, who seemed to have walked out of the illusion into reality. He loved her courage to take responsibility for what she did and her courage to break free from her fate in the face of adversity. Naturally, he had to accept her anger and hatred. Not only Queen Sylvanas, but the Windrunner sisters would never let Arthes go. However, eldest sister, third sister, and fourth sister buried this hatred deep in their hearts, while Sylvanas showed it all on his face. Let her be. If she didn't try, if she didn't do her best, she wouldn't give up. The only question now was, would Arthes defeat Queen Sylvanas first, or would Duque take care of Malygos first? After a few minutes of probing, Duque had a rough understanding of Malygos. Among the undead dragons, bone dragons that fought with basic instincts and under the command of high-level undead were the weakest. Because after losing their elemental dominance and spell-casting abilities, bone dragons seemed very strong, but in reality, they couldn't even beat a living dragon of the same level. After all, muscles and tendons were quite obvious bonuses for a dragon's melee attacks. One level higher were ordinary ice dragons. They already had bones, and because they still retained a relatively complete soul, they could control the elements and release simple frost dragon breath. Among the undead dragons, one level higher were like Syndagosa. Although she had lost the ability to think independently, 10,000 years of hatred made her soul extremely powerful. Magic was based on the existence of the soul. The strength of the soul also led to the improvement of spell-casting ability. If not for Malygos, the one standing in front of Duque today would have been his dead wife, Syndagosa. And the highest level was undoubtedly an undead dragon like Malygos. Because Dracolic's specialized spell-casting abilities, the price they had to pay was that they couldn't preserve the power of melee to the greatest extent. For the blue dragons that relied on spells to survive, this was the best choice. If not for the previous interception, which cut Malygos' body in half and intercepted the Titan runes, Malygos in the form of a Dracolic would probably be even more powerful. Frankly speaking, even with a large number of Titan runes in the elemental domain, Duque really didn't dare to say that he could suppress Malygos, who had the geographical advantage. Perhaps this was the main reason why Arthes had specially sent him to stall for time. Ha! Hate your powerlessness. Lament that your women are going to become undead. Duke Marcus, this is your punishment for offending me. Once I kill you, you and your women will become my slaves. I will torture you. I will torture you for 10,000 years. Malygos, who was in a state of madness, kept shouting. Duque didn't know if he should curse at the Blue Dragon King who had completely let himself go after the fall. In the sky, the dancing snowflakes quickly gathered at one point under the Dracolica's control. In less than a tenth of a second, they formed a giant icicle that was big enough to pull the pillars of Orgrimmton. When he threw the icicle at Duque, dozens of shining blue arcane missiles pierced into the icicle like spears. The arcane energy killed the frost elements and caused an intense explosion. The destructive power spread out and accelerated the icicle's collapse. The splashing frost elements in the form of ice shards and mist shot countless snowflakes in all directions. This scene was like the fireworks that Duque had seen on New Year's before he transmigrated. Unfortunately, there were only two monotonous colors, snow white and arcane blue. Ha! Duke Marcus, you're finished. As long as one member of the hero team dies, your invincible legend will be shattered. They will immediately join the Calamity Army and defeat the heroes that you're so proud of one by one like a snowball. Just wait to face the Calamity Army formed by your women and subordinates. Is that so? Duque smiled faintly. He had to admit that Malygos' words were a little bit right. All along, there had been too many powerful people who died in the early stages of history. When the return of the Legion came, there was always a sense of heartache. For so many years, Duque had been holding the command of the hero team. This was what he was afraid of. Victory kept accumulating, and Duque was a little worried again. He was like a nanny or a spoiler, telling everyone the enemy's strategy in advance and then winning. Would such a victory be able to temper a strong individual to take charge of an area? Chapter 1709. The alliance was getting stronger and stronger. However, after Duque came to power 15 years after the Dark Portal, the new ballads that were sung in the taverns lacked a sense of history. A victory without sacrifice could preserve vitality to the greatest extent, but on the other hand, it couldn't sharpen the strongest will. Gradually, Duque discovered that there was an uncontrollable blind optimism in the upper echelons of the alliance. Yes, the three leaders of the Burning Legion had fallen, or at least that was what it looked like. The two ancient gods had also been defeated. What could stop the Alliance's hero team? No one said it, but that was what they all thought. In such a good situation, it seemed that everyone was a little complacent. Duque couldn't imagine what would happen if they continued to maintain this mentality when facing the Burning Legion's apocalyptic attack. But he couldn't deliberately lose a battle of this level. He could only hope that there would be a suitable battle. It was difficult. Phew! Letting out a long breath, Duque's eyes became determined. He understood his future path a little bit, to delegate power and let the leaders face the storm alone. This path might be difficult, and it would be accompanied by blood and sacrifice, but it was necessary. But before that, he had to defeat Arthas first. The magic that was bombarding him seemed to have nothing to do with Duque anymore. He fell into a strange state of tranquility. A tish was raised high in his left hand as if to show off, and the bright arcane light almost blinded Malygos' ghost eyes. In fact, Duke's right hand, which was behind his back, was actually holding his Song of Light and Shadow. System Elf, activate Arcane Storm in 10 seconds. Understood. In 10 seconds, the situation on the battlefield, which had almost become a fixed pattern, suddenly changed. Malygos was caught off guard by this fierce attack that came almost without warning. The aura of almost squeezing out every drop of magic power really shocked Malygos. According to his estimation, not only did Duque exhaust the magic power of the magic circuit in his body, but he also didn't let go of the magic power of the external magic net circuit attached to it. For a mage like Duque who grew up in the orthodox way, arcane magic was the absolute foundation. Without the support of the arcana technique, it would be difficult for him to use the ice and fire elements smoothly. Duque's actions were tantamount to destroying his own foundation, at least in the short term. Is Duque mad at me? Or is Sylvanus really his reverse scale? Malygos sneered in his heart. Both of them were top-notch magic elemental magic. In a situation where both of them had similar levels of mystery and concentration of elemental magic, the deciding factor of victory was no longer magical techniques. The key to victory was usually the amount of elemental reserves, vitality, and magic resistance of each other. From Malago's point of view, he had the support of the Lich King's magical ley line, while Duque had the magic net that connected the 4 major elemental realms. In a situation where they could not cut off each other's elemental supply, this battle would become a long one. That was exactly what he wanted. He believed that the Lich King would finish his battle before the outcome of this battle was decided. It would be difficult for Sylvanas, who only used the wind element, to break through Arthas' defense. While the power of lightning was impressive, it would be difficult to defeat Arthas, who had the home advantage. When her offensive weakened, it would be the end of the battle, and Arthas, who had more stamina, would win. Malygos did not know that Duque had made the same judgment faster than him. Tens of thousands of arcane energy beams, which looked like turbulence but were actually precisely calculated by the system, shot out in less than 1/100th of a second. They collided with each other, and then bounced out at all kinds of unimaginable angles like pinball balls. Faced with such an exaggerated and seemingly chaotic group attack, Malygos did not react at first. He thought that it was absolutely random. That was until he saw, to his shock, that the ice storm he had pushed out to meet the arcane storm was easily destroyed. Every ice prism was blown up by an arcane energy ray that was shot at the most scorching angle at the most precise angle. Be it large or small, the ice elemental clusters were all scattered, turning into true elemental turbulence. For the first time, Malygos found that he had lost control of his large-scale spell. The ice tornado, which should have been spinning wildly in a clockwise direction, suddenly showed signs of collapsing. Left with no choice, Malygos roared and stretched out his claws, using almost all the ice elemental clusters he could summon at that moment to pour into the ice tornado in front of him. Under his all-out attack, the ice tornado, which had been slightly scattered and shrinking, expanded again. Its size was at least twice as large as before. But Malygos immediately realized that something was wrong. The arcane storm's energy beam was still spicy and tricky, but the total amount of arcane elements injected was obviously not right. This was a classic case of a lack of follow-up. Arthas could not completely exclude other elements from entering the fortress, so naturally he could not completely cut off the magic power and elemental supply from the magic net to Duque. This seemingly unexplained drop. Malygos roared angrily and spat out a mouthful of dragon breath at Duque. The former Dragon King's dragon breath was powerful. But in the eyes of an elemental sculpting expert like Malygos, dragon breath was simply a torrent of energy. It was powerful, but the efficiency of using the elements was too low. He couldn't care so much. Under his nervous gaze, he didn't know if he was lucky or not. The dragon breath that gathered the incomparably pure ice elemental clusters was like a raging wave. It easily eliminated the interference of the large and small arcane energy beams and hit Duque, who was originally standing on the steps of the square. There was no ice barrier, no magic shield, not even a trace of panic. The moment before Duque was completely engulfed by the frost dragon breath, Malygos saw the mocking smile on Duque's lips. That was the smile of a cunning scheme succeeding. At that moment, Malygos felt that his heart, which had stopped beating long ago, seemed to have regained its vitality. Then, because of the most intense shock, it suddenly jumped. "Not good!" Malygos cried out. "It's too late!" At that moment, 100 meters above Malygos' head, an arcane energy cluster that seemed to be unable to cause any damage to the Dracolich suddenly exploded. The real Duque appeared. At the same time, Duque shot out like a cannonball and crashed into Malygos at high speed. With a thought from the Dracolich, ice dragon ghosts of various sizes appeared in the void beside him. They opened their mouths and released countless powerful ice elemental magic attacks. These spells hit Duque, who was charging down at high speed. It was like a surging wave crashing into the bow of an icebreaker and then parting to the sides. However, the waves that were knocked away were made of white ice elemental lines. Chapter 1710. This is, as if mimicking the constriction of a human's pupils, the two soul flames in the eye sockets of Maligo's dragon skull shrank instantly. The muscles on his face that had dried up due to the loss of life could not reflect the former Blue Dragon King's shock and anger. However, the elemental waves on his body clearly showed that he was temporarily out of control of the surrounding elements. Even if this, temporarily, only meant less than 1/10 of a second. In a battle between demigods, this was enough. The ice elements that were thrown out were harder to retrieve than water that was spilled. On the surface, it looked like he was going all out, but it turned out to be Duke's bait. Maligos played all his cards at once. It was a classic big move that missed the enemy, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. The ice dragon spirits that he summoned were the soul cores of the ice dragons that Duke had destroyed in Rotterdam. After Maligos, the Blue Dragon King, surrendered, Arthas was no longer interested in holding on to these dragon spirits. He only wanted to hold onto Maligos' soul cores. Maligos hoped that these ice dragon spirits could interfere with Duke, even for a moment. He was destined to be disappointed. His subordinates from 10,000 years ago were useless. Duke raised a tish high in front of him. The blue light that bloomed from the drumstick was a strange spell made of high-purity arcane energy. It was similar to a subspace effect. All the elements that crashed into it were repelled without exception. It was not a matter of whether the elements could cause damage, but the air around the tip of the staff did not allow any form of energy or elements other than Titan energy to exist. This was the crushing of a high-level mystery against a low-level mystery. "Don't underestimate me," Maligos roared. Facing Duke, who was diving down, Maligos stretched his neck and bit at Duque with the speed of a viper's tongue. He had to admit that this move was a bit unexpected. The strongest thing about dragon liches was their magic. Their spellcasting ability was so powerful that it was easy for people to forget that they were dragons before they were liches. The sharp teeth of a dragon could tear apart 99% of the existence in this world. Even Duque, who already had a demigod body, was definitely not in that 1%. Bitten? Almost there? Just from the taste alone, Maligos knew that he was about to bite Duque. Duque was practically delivering himself to the dragon's mouth. He ran headfirst into Maligos' big mouth that was filled with the stench of decay. According to the normal procedure, Duque would be swallowed in one gulp. Even if the former Dragon King's stomach had withered and shrunk, as long as there was enough shadow energy, Maligos could still recover some of his body's functions. For example, he could quickly secrete gastric acid and melt Duque. This was Duque's real body, without a doubt. Maligos could almost imagine how delicious it would be to swallow this despicable kid who had stepped into the divine realm as a mortal and made him disgusted and angry. Perhaps his taste buds had degenerated and he could no longer taste anything. But that kind of spiritual satisfaction must be indescribable. Just as Maligos was thinking about swallowing, Duque's cold voice suddenly came from his mouth. "Stupid dragon. You're thinking too much." Accompanied by this angry curse, an incomparably bright golden light burst out from the gap between the dragon's teeth. Wah! It was a feeling of extreme heat. It was as if what he had eaten wasn't something else, but a sun. High temperature, scorching heat, and a burning pain that burned his soul. It was as if his tongue had been pulled out by a hot poker and then burned off with an ultra-high temperature welding torch. Unable to control himself, Maligos subconsciously let out the most miserable scream. This wasn't the end. Duque pulled out Song of Light and Shadow. It was definitely not as simple as cutting off Maligos's broken tongue from his smelly mouth. This was just a part of his plan. In less than 1/3 of a second, Duque, who had switched to a sword, had become one with it. He directly broke through Maligos' rotten chin muscles and pierced through. A golden light flashed and connected Maligos' chin and chest. The sharp golden sword rotated clockwise at high speed, turning into a terrifying drill. When all the strange sounds were squeezed into 1 second, it sounded like a special elongated sound. The sturdy dragon scales, dragon skin, and thick muscles that Maligos had been proud of when he was alive had weakened due to the passing of his life. These dull-toned items didn't even feel as good as a top-tier epic-ranked shield. As Maligos screamed and subconsciously retreated, Duque's divine artifact longsword finally broke through the rotten chest and pierced deeply into the soul core that was suspended in the middle of the chest, replacing the role of the heart. Divine golden light, with a small amplitude of tens of thousands of times per second, fiercely attacked this big walnut that was condensed with the powerful power of darkness. The black soul core, which had been greatly strengthened by resentment, anger, and other negative energy, kept making its final struggle. Everything was in vain. The moment the blade of the divine sword passed down from the Pantheon temple touched the core, the result was decided. No matter how much it resisted, it couldn't escape the crushing of fate. In the soul world, what Duque heard was a sound that sounded like an egg breaking. Woo-woo. In the end, Maligos let out a soul lament that wanted to cry out but couldn't. As the soul core was destroyed, it became smaller and more ethereal. Even after being cut in half, the huge dragon body quickly lost the ability to move. The former king of magic, lord of the blue dragons, and one of the 5 dragon aspects of Azeroth, Maligos, soul annihilation. It entered the chest and came out from the back. When Duque pierced through Maligos' body and stood 100 meters behind him, the huge rotten body collapsed with a bang, causing smoke and dust to fill the air. Duque didn't even look at it. As if mocking himself, he said, "Sigh." I still remember asking the guy next to me how to add talent points to a mage. What did that guy say? Add 1 point to something that will shine, then add points to charge, armor piercing, and fury. You'll be a good pharaoh. At that time, I thought it was a joke, but now I feel that what this guy said is the truth. They said that everyone was a noble pharaoh, using mystery and mysterious magic to determine the winner, and then fighting like hooligans, using melee combat to determine the winner. Just thinking about it was enough to make one drunk. Duque shook his head and spread his divine will, quietly casting his attention to the other battlefields. Chapter 1711. Tyrion was fighting rotten intestines. As the wielder of Ashbringer, Tyrion's attack power was not low. Paladins were famous for being able to fight, carry, and heal people. Apart from a slight lack of mobility and low attack power, everything else was an advantage. Now, even his attack power had increased. This Tyrion Fordring, as long as he didn't encounter an enemy with high agility and running around, anyone who saw him would have to call him Grandpa. The title of Empress Dowager was not undeserved. Originally, it should have been easy for Tyrion to deal with a mutant monster leader. However, rotten intestines, as the boss used by the Scourge to hold the fort, naturally had its own uniqueness. Since Nazul became the Lich King, the Scourge had been committed to various taboo experiments. Among them, the plague experiment was the most fruitful. The disgusting thing about rotten intestines was that it would constantly make a fuss about poisonous gas. As soon as Tyrion was thrown in front of rotten intestines, the field had already been injected with orange withering poisonous gas. Even though Tyrion immediately stirred up the holy light in his body to purify the poisonous gas as much as possible, the effect was not great. If not for Dooku's invention of the Azeroth gas mask, Tyrion might have been kneeling by now. Even with the gas mask, he still felt that he was continuously being injured by the poisonous gas. The damage was divided into 4 states: high, medium, low, and none. Tyrion noticed that rotten intestines would inhale the poisonous gas on the field every once in a while to increase its attack power. Every time it inhaled, the damage from the poisonous gas would be reduced. In contrast, after rotten intestines sucked up all the poisonous gas on the field, it would expel all the poisonous gas at once, causing huge damage to Tyrion in the form of a gas bomb. At the same time, the poisonous gas damage on the field returned to the highest. However, Tyrion could not kill it directly with Ashbringer even with all his strength. The deformed flesh that was born from countless taboo experiments contained unimaginable evil power. The high concentration of shadow energy in these flesh and bones desperately resisted the invasion of the holy light. Even with Ashbringer's full strength, it could only turn about 1/10 of its flesh into ashes. Oh, a monster specially prepared to restrain Ashbringer? Tyrion was not young anymore. He had long passed the age of impulse. If he had just become a paladin, he might have rushed to attack recklessly. But after 25 years of fighting, he had already changed from a young boy to a mature and steady holy knight uncle. After carefully evaluating the combat power and characteristics of both sides, Theon did not rush the fight. He had a plan and rhythmically whittled down Rotten Intestine's life force. The Empress Dowager was still able to hold her ground against Rotten Intestines, but not everyone had a suitable opponent. For example, Gavin Rad was having a hard time. His opponent, Rotten Face, was a typical monster that countered him. Although Rotten Noodles had the same appearance as Rotten Intestines, their attack mechanism was completely different. It would cast Aberration Infection on Gavin Rad. At first, after Gavin Rad dispelled this strange disease, he did not notice it. He immediately discovered that the virus spores that had been expelled from his body had actually absorbed the foreign objects in the air and on the ground, and soon turned into a small sludge monster. At first, Gavin Rad did not pay attention to the green poop. In the end, after going back and forth a few times, there were too many small sludge monsters. When it came to large sludge monsters, Gavin Rad had a hard time. This big guy's attack was very high, and it just so happened that it was the type that countered him. Holy light and physical attacks were ineffective against the ooze monsters. However, he did not have many elemental attacks. It was true that the wind sword in his hand had natural elemental attacks, but the problem was that it was very difficult for physical attacks like the wind blade to deal heavy damage to the ooze monsters. Left with no choice, Gavin Rad could only run while being chased by the ooze monsters, constantly looking for opportunities to attack Rotten Face. His holy light could drive his body to heal, but he could not replenish the blood and energy he had lost. This battle was not only a test of willpower, but also a judgment of the battle situation and an inference of the enemy's characteristics. Because of Anastrian's betrayal, and because the Alliance had cooperated with the Horde during the fight against the Burning Legion and the expedition against Illidan in the Outland, the leaders of the Calamity Army were all very focused. Apart from a few places, such as Varians, where Brawl was heavily injured in exchange for a quick victory, the rest of the battles were rather difficult. The most dangerous one was naturally the battle under the Ice Monarch. Vashch's 6 weapons slashed at Arthas almost at the same time. In terms of speed, the Naga Queen was definitely above the Lich King. This was her greatest characteristic, and Vashch was also prepared to make full use of this advantage. Unfortunately, the 3 women present were too unfamiliar with the skills of the Death Knights. Before entering the Ice Crown Fortress, it was true that every leader had been asked to discuss the skills of the Death Knights with Darian Mograine. However, most of the skills that the Lich King passed down to the Death Knights were weakened versions. Moreover, the effects of the skills used by the powerhouses of different levels were also very different. Blowing the opponent with cold wind and infecting the enemy with frost plague, this kind of cold touch, which reduces the opponent's attack speed, was used by Darian. For genuine demigods like Vashch, it was only an itch. As the Lich King rushed out, Vashch only felt extremely cold air coming from the sky and the earth, attacking from all directions. It directly forced its way through the gaps of her scales and through the pores that were supposed to be closed. It was a terrifying chill that could freeze one's bloodline and even numb one's soul. Even Queen Shi and Onyxia, who were watching from afar, could clearly see Vashch's movements slowing down. The originally swift and fierce slashes suddenly became slow. Every joint in the Naga Queen's body seemed to have rusted. Not only were her movements slow, but they even made terrifying creaking sounds. Onyxia had no choice but to give Vashch a fireball. Under normal circumstances, this was a classic case of murdering a teammate. But in the case of Arthas's invincible cold air, it was a life-saving move. When the Frostmourne slashed at her, Vashch barely regained her normal speed. At this time, Arthas made 3 consecutive swords the rune greatsword that emitted dark and evil waves turned into a cyan shadow in his hand. 1 slash, 1 press, and 1 press. Because the speed was too fast, even Sylvanas, who had amazing eyesight, still felt as if Frostmourne had split into 3 in an instant and turned into a double-headed greatsword at the same time, clashing with Vashch's 6 melee weapons. Clang dash, a total of 6 sounds of blades clashing actually turned into the same metallic sound. Chapter 1712. She clearly had 6 arms, but the subtle differences in the use of power resulted in Vashj using one arm to withstand Arthas's full-powered slashes with both arms. The 6 consecutive slashes were too fast for Vashj, who had reduced her speed. It was as if she had withstood 6 slashes in an instant. At this time, Queen Sylvanas' lightning arrow had just arrived. Clang! The arrow was knocked away by Frostmourne. The blazing lightning struck Arthas's right arm, but it was instantly neutralized by the even more powerful ice element. Tisk! Vashj spat fiercely. While her 6 arms were numb, she could only flick her snake tail to force Arthas back. At the same time, she used the momentum to retreat and finally floated out of the range of the Lich King's sword aura unscathed. At this time, it was only the 3rd round of the 3 women besieging Arthas. In these few exchanges, not to mention gaining the upper hand. When they fought, they just barely didn't get hurt. Just a moment ago, Queen Sylvie had been in high spirits, but now, there was only a deathly stillness about her. In the previous rounds, they had tried almost everything. The last move. Queen Sylvanas pulled herself together and shouted. As Duque's woman and a companion with a common goal, Sylvanas had long taken the opportunity to look for them to discuss the problem of cooperation. After all, demigods working together would have the best chance of killing an existence like Arthas, who stood at the peak of the demigod realm. Unexpectedly, she really used the biggest trick that she had prepared in advance. The storm was gathering. The wind rolled up, and in the blink of an eye, a lightning tornado appeared. It was not inferior to the ice storm, Grim Winter, that Arthas had conjured. In a moment, all the ice and snow within 100 feet of Queen Sylvanas were instantly annihilated by the intense pressure of the highly concentrated wind element. They were not crushed into powder in the physical sense, but forcibly annihilated into nothingness. For the first time, Arthas's eyes revealed a serious look. Glancing at Vashj, who had yet to attack, Arthas slammed Frostmourne into the ground. Strong frost aura began to fill his body. Thunder rumbled, and a lightning arrow shot out from the divine artifact, Solidar Wrath of the Stars, aimed at Arthas' forehead. It was as if he wanted to blow up the Lich King's head. Unfortunately, the powerful arrow landed squarely on the ice wall of spiritual energy that Arthas had stirred up. Not only did it not break through, but a strong white light flashed out of the mist of spiritual energy and bounced the lightning arrow back. Sylvanas, who was flying at high speed with the Black Dragon Princess, was almost shot down as well. If it was just thunder, Queen Sylvie would not mind retrieving her arrows. Unfortunately, the arrow that bounced back had already been infused with an even more evil power. Onyxia's sudden descent, coupled with Queen Syriana's urgent crouching, allowed her to barely avoid this counterattack. However, the icy chill that came from her back still slightly invaded Queen Syriana's body. Ugh! Queen Sylvie could not help but let out a muffled groan. One could imagine the power of a demigod of wind's full-powered attack. The arrow that was bounced back eventually fell in front of the square of the ice throne, driven by the cold wind. The dozens of crisscrossing, fragmented cracks on the hard tiles of the square were proof. However, this was still unable to do anything to Arthas. But it was enough to attract his attention. Vashj, who had adjusted, pounced forward again. This time, all 6 of her weapons were surrounded by flashing lightning. The crisscrossing blade radiance formed a ball of destructive light. The frost aura that Arthas had set up in the surroundings was also dispersed by this storm of blades. Arthas raised his left hand, and a ball of ice elemental energy swept towards Vashj like a mage's icicle spell. But her 6 swords had already turned into a meat grinder along with her body, madly chopping at the elemental energy that was coming her way. On the epic-level weapons, the sharp edges of the blades flashed with lightning. However, these epic-level weapons that could split open the body of any Icecrown Fortress leader seemed to be under great pressure, and they let out a trembling sound that symbolized weakness. Queen Sylvanas, who was on the dragon's back, could not help but let out a scream. At this moment, with a series of cracking sounds, those epic weapons that were incomparably precious in the eyes of mortals actually shattered like fragile glass at this moment. Not to mention Queen Sylvanas, even Vashti herself was stunned. Seeing that Frostmourne was fiercely slashing towards her, Vashti finally pulled down her face and took out 6 epic-level shields from her storage bag. Bang, bang, bang. It was just one slash, but 3 of Vashti's shields exploded. Her Naga body, which was not petite, was directly sent flying by Arthas. If it were not for the third attack, Arthas would not have let go of this opportunity to pursue and attack. This was the attack routine that the 3 of them came up with. Sylvanas attacked first, using his bow and arrows to attract Arthas's attention. When Vashti entangled him, Onyxia directly came up with a deep breath. In the sky, the huge figure of the Black Dragon Princess enveloped Arthas. The deep breath that caused countless people's expressions to change poured onto Arthas's head without deviation. However, the effect was not good. The hit was a hit. As soon as the fiery dragon's breath entered the frost domain around Arthas's body, it immediately disappeared into nothingness. Even the fire elements in the periphery were directly absorbed and flew straight to the center of the frost domain. Onyxia screamed, "How can we fight this? The high-purity fire elements that I have been brewing for so long were all devoured by him. We are not on the same level at all." No wonder the Black Dragon Princess looked like she had seen a ghost. All the attack methods were ineffective. Anyone would not be able to help but curse. Vashti suddenly smiled bitterly. "Why do I feel like we are all fake demigods?" Although the demigod-level elemental power was almost the top mystical rule in the world of Azeroth, there was still a difference in the degree of mysticism between them. Simply borrowing elements, no matter how purified and concentrated, could not shake Lich King Arthas. They did not know that before injecting their spirit and their unique rule into the elements. The elements borrowed from the elemental realm could not shake Arthas' rule in the slightest. What's more, Arthas, who had the geographical advantage, had the magic and elements stored in the entire ice throne as a backup. Chapter 1713. The huge difference in strength made Sylvanas' heart turn cold for a moment. She had trained hard for so many years, but the gap between her and Arthas did not seem to be narrowing. Instead, it seemed to be getting bigger. Once upon a time, Arthas was strong, but it was only in terms of quantity. The endless undead army seemed to be an inexhaustible dark force. In terms of quality, he did not feel that there was a chasm between them. But now, Sylvanas and the others were depressed, because the 3 of them suddenly discovered that Arthas could actually take away their elements. It was not like the Lich King who played with ice had changed to become a fire mage or a nature shaman, but it was a typical method of harming others without benefiting oneself. He infected all the elements that were temporarily out of control with frost plague. This was more like marking or leaving a signature for one's own belongings. To break it, one could only use their own willpower to dispel the will of the Lich King, and then redeclare the ownership of this part of the elements. Even if Sylvanas had strong willpower and spirit attributes, as a ranger, she was not good at spreading her own willpower and controlling the elements around her. This kind of battle in the spirit domain happened to be her weakness. After becoming a demigod of wind, she had worked hard in this area. Unfortunately, compared to a certain Lich King who had lost his body, was stuffed into an ice skeleton, and only relied on his spirit for the past 20 years, Queen Sylvanas was completely nothing. The situation made the 3 women very miserable. Playing close combat with Arthas, he played elements with you and even slowed down Vashti to a lower speed, and then defeated Vashti with gorgeous skills. Playing elements with Arthas, the 3 of them could not beat him. Left with no choice, Sylvanas could only encourage the female dragon under her to fight head-on. "Onyxia, now it's up to you. You don't want to go back and punish Duque, do you?" Actually, I'm not afraid. If it's a small punishment, I will." If the dragon's face was not black, it was estimated that the dragon's face would be red. Queen Sylvanas heard the sound of saliva swallowing. Queen Sylvanas cursed the shameless dragon in her heart, and could only change the direction. You also don't want Duque to ignore you. If it's a placement play, damn. Left with no choice, Queen Sylvia used her trump card. If you don't work hard, Duque won't want you anymore. This was a little scary. Onyxia shivered, but in the end she mustered up her courage and charged towards Arthis. Since it was the Black Dragon, Vashj decisively turned to support. There wasn't enough space for a Black Dragon to charge and let her participate. She began to fight for control of the frost elements. At the very least, she had to attract Arthis' attention. In fact, she did. After Duque's reminder, Vashj began to specialize in the water elemental domain. After all, this was what she was truly good at and what she could do to the extreme. Frost is a derivative of water. While Vashj was focused on fighting for the water elements in the air, Arthas did feel threatened. The Ice Crown Castle was the pinnacle of the land of ice and snow, as well as the largest node of the ice element mana vein. However, the natural laws of the world did not stipulate that this node must belong to the Lich King. Vashj seizing control of the water elemental energy here was no doubt digging at his roots. As the two fought, it was clear that this was a tug-of-war where one side had the absolute advantage. After all, Arthis could quickly corrupt the frost elements and bring them under his control, while Vashj's purification of the shadowized frost elements was too slow. However, if he dared to let it go, Vashj would dare to snatch it. She didn't hope to succeed, she just wanted to attract Arthis' attention. This was the spiciness of Vashj. Arthis had no choice but to free up his left hand and spread his fingers, strengthening the control of the frost elements in Vashj's direction. A chance! Onyxia was secretly delighted. She couldn't help but flap her wings a few times, suddenly raising her already very fast speed to the highest level. On her back, Queen Sylph knocked an arrow and once again condensed a powerful lightning arrow, preparing to slap Arthis in the face at almost zero distance. Ho ho ho! How terrifying was a dragon aspect's all-out charge. One could tell just by looking at the frost elements that were forcefully pushed aside. The frost elements that contained the power of darkness seemed to scream and dodge in front of this dragon aspect that was covered in blazing fire elements. The frost elements that were pushed aside continued to spread to both sides, bringing about endless waves in the entire space of the throne. The overly condensed frost elements swept across the already narrow throne platform, and thick pillars were instantly covered in a thick layer of ice wherever they passed. The pillars that were supposed to be incomparably hard let out light cracking sounds. That was due to the pressure of a large amount of ice under the rapid freezing. If there was water in some of the small holes in the stone pillars, then when the water turned into ice, the increase in volume would in turn burst the stone pillars. Under the Black Dragon Princess's imposing manner, the three ladies all felt that Arthis would dodge. They were all wrong. Arthis did not dodge. Frostmourne slashed upwards from below, shooting out a sword wind. The destructive power of this top-notch artifact was completely revealed at this moment. The sword wind swept across the platform that was suspended in the void, and swept past a huge curved fong made of ice. A straight black line immediately appeared on the fong, and that black line went from bottom to top, directly splitting the hard fong that was as thick as a dragon's leg into two. Time seemed to be frozen at this moment. In Queen Sylvanas' opinion, the Black Dragon Princess could completely resist this blow, and then rush over to give Arthis a ruthless bite. Perhaps she would suffer some injuries, but at least she could open up the situation. However, with her resolute personality, she neglected Onyxia's cowardice, and also neglected that she wasn't Duque. If the one riding the Black Dragon Princess was Duque, she would definitely be 100 times more courageous. Even if she was facing Sargeras at full strength, she might have the courage to charge. Unfortunately, she was Sylvanas, just one of Duque's women. That natural distrust and the cowardice after being subdued made Onyxia flap her right wing at the last moment, and make a movement similar to a side roll. No! Queen Sylvanas only had time to let out a scream. It was indeed a dodge, but in the process of dodging, the Black Dragon Princess couldn't help but expose her dragon abdomen. Arthis raised the Frostmourne that had already been raised, and made another slash. As a last resort, Sylvanus shot out the thunder arrow that had already been charged. Chapter 17:14. Whether it was Sylvanus's lightning arrow or Vashti's elemental fight, whichever side succeeded would cause Arthas great losses. Arthas did not dodge or evade. Hundreds of cubic meters of frost elemental energy were snatched away from him. The lightning arrow, which would have been easily blocked in the past, hit Arthas without any hindrance. Due to the deviation of the angle, the arrow was aimed at his chest instead. Arthas took the full brunt of the arrow. Lightning snakes writhed in his chest, and even the skeleton carvings on his heavy armor cracked from the arrow. Cracks spread out like a spider web. It was foreseeable that the damage of this arrow would not be low. If this was before, Queen Sylvanus would definitely be overjoyed. But at this moment, her heart sank into the ice abyss. An attack that Arthas risked injury to launch was definitely not child's play. Frostmourne drew a full stop to this attack. Onyxia knew that it was her fault, but she still held onto a sliver of hope and prayed that Arthas would not hit her. Unfortunately, in the next moment, she suddenly felt a shiver pass through her body. That feeling scared her into curling up subconsciously. Immediately, she saw a cold black light sweep over her body. Even though she tried to dodge as much as possible, she still felt pain in her lower body and right wing. The heart-wrenching pain, accompanied by the power of darkness, quickly spread from the wound to every corner of her body. It was like a boulder falling into a calm lake, creating circles of huge waves. Between the peaks and troughs of the waves, white and black spiritual power flickered continuously. This power formed a structure similar to a spider web, and it began to quickly corrode Onyxia's body. "It's over!" Onyxia tried to balance her body again. At the same time, she swung her tail fiercely, thinking that at the very least, both sides would be injured. But Arthas, who had his hands free, ignored Vashti, who was swinging her sword at him, and grabbed at the black dragon with his left hand. Death's grasp. With Arthas's strength, it was effortless for him to restrain a black dragon that weighed dozens of tons. That unexpected loss of balance once again disrupted the black dragon princess's rhythm. Sylvanus protected him with all his might, and then shot another arrow with all his might. Arthas' left pauldron was instantly destroyed by the arrow. One could even clearly see that the deltoid muscle on his shoulder looked as if it had been gnawed on by a wild beast. Arthas did not care and stabbed the dragon a third time. This time, the sword stabbed into the dragon's abdomen, causing the black dragon to let out an earth-shattering wail. Vashti had arrived. The frost aura around Arthas suddenly exploded. With him as the center, an ice mountain expanded at an astonishing speed of 100 meters per second. The 6 new epic-ranked weapons slashed at the iceberg, but the speed at which the iceberg was destroyed was only slightly faster than the speed at which it was formed. It would be too late to complete the attack on the Lich King. The next moment, Arthas brandished his sword and charged at Vashti. 2 white, angel-like soul creatures, Wagri's shadow guards, with 2 wings and 2 wings as their foundation, suddenly charged out of the void. They caught Vashti off guard and threw themselves at her, hugging her tightly. That earth-shattering suppression actually made her unable to break free for a moment. Arthas had arrived. After breaking through the iceberg, he displayed Frostmourne horizontally to Vashti in a strange posture. The eye sockets of the terrifying skull carvings on the blade flickered with heart-palpitating flames of the netherworld. Vashti had never experienced such a feeling. She couldn't help but look at the skull. Suddenly, she heard a noisy soul voice. In this voice, there seemed to be hundreds and thousands of people talking and whispering. It was like the palace banquet in Azhara 10,000 years ago. She clearly wanted to refuse this noise that constantly echoed in her ears, but the queen's orders forced her to listen to every voice, trying to find a secret conversation that was disadvantageous to the queen or herself. Vashti's mind was greatly disturbed by that vague, yet distinct, sense of confusion. When she woke up from this disturbance, it was already too late. Arthas's fierce horizontal slash had arrived. It was a sword momentum that seemed to be able to split the entire world from the horizon, and there was no room to dodge at all. At this critical moment, all Vashj could do was raise all 6 weapons and futilely block in front of her. Bang, 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 bang. 6 consecutive crisp sounds, as well as 2 sounds that sounded like ripping silk, announced the failure of her final struggle. The blood drained from Vashj's face, and her fluttering red hair seemed to have lost its color. Even though she had already done her best to suck in her abdomen, she could not avoid heavy injuries. 6 epic weapons shattered, 2 arms chopped off, and her lower abdomen was directly cut open. This was the result. If she could, Vashj would rather see her intestines and organs spilled all over the ground than see her wounds without a drop of blood. This meant that the power of Frostmourne had already begun to completely invade her body. She was indeed a demigod, but a demigod's body could not be immune to even more powerful soul corrosion. Vashj knew that if she died before the Ice Throne, her soul would not even have the chance to return to planet Azeroth. She would become Arthas's slave like the former dragon aspect, Maligos. Jumping down from the fallen black dragon, Sylvanas' face had already lost all color. It was too tragic. She had originally thought that she, who had the weakest constitution among the 3, would be used by Arthas as a breakthrough point. She had always been on guard, always leaving at least 20% of her wind element to defend against Arthas' grasp of death. If she was forcefully pulled into close combat, she would have lost more than half of the battle. Evidently, her thoughts had been completely seen through and used instead. Arthas didn't plan to be the first to attack her. As long as he crushed Onyxia and Vashj, who had stronger constitutions, Sylvanas would be nothing more than a lamb waiting to be slaughtered in his eyes. Now, Arthas flashed his sinister smile. Ha! Pitiful female elf. Do you really think that your rage for revenge can burn me, the Lich King? Laughable. Too laughable. Without Duke Marcus, you are nothing. Arthas' ridicule was like the sharpest sword, fiercely gouging into Sylvanas' heart. His revenge was being mocked. The blood of thousands of her compatriots was flowing in vain. Even she herself might very well follow in the footsteps of her compatriots, just like that blood queen Lanais, crawling against her will at the feet of this great enemy. Chapter 1715. To Sylvanas, death was not scary. What was scary was that after death, she would have to serve an enemy whose hands were stained with the blood of her own kind like a slave. Elves were proud. They had a great history that they could be proud of, and a glorious magic civilization. Whether it was the magnificent architecture of Silvery Moon City or the Long Song Forest that allowed elven rangers to enjoy nature and tranquility, they were the greatest inheritance and wealth of the elves. Arthas and his ugly, filthy scourge army that should have been destroyed 1,000,000,000 times had destroyed everything. They had destroyed the glorious inheritance of the elves, trampled on their pride, killed their friends and loved ones, and shamelessly enslaved their souls and bodies. This was a crime that could not be forgiven. The inextinguishable pride in her heart did not allow Sylvanas to make any compromises on the important matter of revenge. However, she saw Lanais, the respected counselor of the past. Now, she served Arthas like a lowly whore. Arthas did not even give her a bone to obtain her loyalty and service. She also saw an Astrian. He could not resist the temptation of eternal life. He first pledged loyalty to Nizul, then rebelled. Then, he joined the Lich King Arthas again, becoming a man who was worse than a dog. Sylvanas could not accept such a thing. However, she knew that if it was her, she would not have fared much better under the endless torture and pressure of her soul. Was she afraid? She was not afraid. She had only made up her mind. If it came to the last moment, she would save the last lightning arrow for herself. That was an arrow that could destroy her body and soul. She already knew that she might not be able to take revenge personally, but at least she would not be the pitiful creature that groveled to serve her enemy. Sylvanas' furious golden eyebrows stood up at the greatest angle. Within her bright and beautiful eyes, it was as if there was a flame, a divine radiance mixed with thunder and lightning that continuously erupted. Compared to the rage and determination in her heart, the elements around her body were unexpectedly calm. Even the most violent lightning power in the natural world was as gentle as water. It quietly rushed over from the void and flowed into her body like rivers flowing into the sea. Duque, I'm sorry. What a joke, to actually break through at a time like this. It was like a sigh, but also a farewell. The malevolence on Arthes's face faded away and was replaced by a look of admiration. It was because at this moment, Servanas had already broken through his limits. This method of imprinting his own mark on every drop of elemental energy signified that Servanas had advanced from a bottom-tier demigod to a mid-tier demigod. Unfortunately, in the eyes of Arthes, who stood at the pinnacle of the demigod realm, she was far from enough. Hee. Based on your perseverance and growth, you are qualified to be the second leader of the Calamity Troop. The corners of Arthes's mouth curled up. I haven't forgotten the hatred of the past. Duque stole my woman, broke my arm, and cut off my waist. I can't let this go unavenged. Because this is my dignity as the Lich King. I'm really looking forward to seeing Duque's expression when he sees that all his women have become undying. How terrifying was the all-out attack of a mid-level demigod. This is very difficult to estimate. Arthes was not afraid, but he had to consider the upcoming battle with Duque. It was worth it to be able to turn Duque's arm and lover into his support, and at the same time, attack Duque's spirit. If this was the Arthes before he fell, he might not have bothered to do this. After he killed his father, Tyrenas, and his master, Uther, all the morals and ethics of the human world could no longer be used to restrict his actions. An ice river suddenly exploded under Arthes's feet. With a light tap of his left foot, Arthes's body flew into the air. In mid-air, his beloved horse, Invincible, had already rushed out of the void and caught Arthes in an instant. At this moment, Arthes had already turned back into a standard Death Knight. When he was alive, Invincible was one of the few great warhorses of Lordaeron. After becoming an undead horse, Invincible received shocking enhancements. When it spread its 4 hooves and galloped, it was as fast as lightning. Servanas had only drawn his bow halfway, and Arthes was already in front of him. Fast, too fast. With the unstoppable force of Invincible, a terrifying sword that seemed to be able to split the sky and earth came crashing down. The atmosphere was shaking. The elements were trembling. The space was buzzing. Servanas, who did not have time to finish his action, had no choice but to raise Solidar high up. In her hands was a divine artifact bow, not a divine artifact sword. Even though Solidar naturally had close combat attributes, it was a pity that it was only a secondary function. A bow, after all, was still a bow. Servanas could already foresee that his extremely precious divine artifact longbow would be destroyed in the next instant. The terrifying Frostman would break through this insignificant resistance and turn her into a corpse in an instant. A walking corpse enslaved by the evil Lich King. At this moment, when time was almost frozen, Servanas realized in despair that he could not even shoot himself one last arrow. Everything in front of him was white. Amidst the white frost were the sorrowful wails of millions of wronged souls. After that, it was Arthes's savage and vicious face. It was a critical moment. But at the very end, Servanas's mind turned to this sentence. I'm sorry. I was too willful. Priests had a skill called Prayer of Despair. Servanas did not believe in it. She used to only believe in herself, but if God gave her a chance to do it all over again, she would choose to believe in Duque. If prayer in despair was useful, then she might as well pray for once. Servanas's tears scattered in the air. She used the last of her strength to call out a name, Duque. She did not expect an answer. However, time and time again in this world, there was always one person who would not let her down. That person was her only partner, Duke Marcus. Coming! With this slightly mischievous and slightly smug voice, a hand suddenly reached out from the portal behind Queen Sylvanas and pulled her in. The famous Frostman slashed through the air, and Arthes could not believe her eyes. Behind him and Invincible, a couple appeared in another portal. Looking at the familiar face, Servanas could not believe it. Her trembling golden eyebrows betrayed her forced calm. She reached out and caressed Duque's face, asking tentatively, "Duque?" Chapter 1716. Duque, it's really you? You're here? Cervanus could not believe her eyes. If I didn't come, you'd all be snatched away by two idiots. *CK. I don't want my woman to become a cold corpse. Duque glared at Queen Sylvanus. It was rare for Cervanus to tremble and shrink back. Her voice was no longer as strong as before. You heard everything? Of course. If I didn't come, would you have sacrificed yourself for your people? Stupid. If Arthas was the kind of opponent that could be destroyed by sacrifice, his grave would have been 3 feet high. Duque cursed fiercely, causing Queen Sylvanus to tremble again and again. Not only that, Duque also curled his lips provocatively at Arthas, who had turned around. I'm sorry I've let you, my people, down? Queen Sylvanus lowered her head, which was always held high. Thus, I'm very disappointed. Your people are also very disappointed. Suddenly, Duque changed the topic. We're not disappointed that you didn't work hard, nor are we disappointed that you're not brave enough. We're disappointed that you can't see the current situation clearly. What era is it now? In the face of such a public enemy, we should naturally gather the strength of the world to fight against him. You can't see the difference in strength between us and the enemy, and you just rushed headfirst into it. That's the most childish heroism. Duque's harsh scolding made Cervanus dare not even raise her head. Her chin was in the cleavage of her chest, and her head was buried deep in Duque's chest. Biting her delicate red lips, she made a mosquito-like sound. I was wrong, Duque, forgive me, okay? Forgive? Sure. After killing Arthas, I'll ravage you so hard that you can't get out of bed for a month. I'll make sure you're pregnant. When you have children, I'll see if you still dare to act so recklessly. After saying that, Duque's right claw dug deep into Queen Sylvanus' right buttocks, as if he was going to crush that extremely elastic piece of meat. Cervanus let out a cry of alarm. Her beautiful face and slender neck were covered in an unbearable crimson. She really wanted to resist, but in the face of Duque's domineering declaration, she felt an unprecedented sense of being conquered and sweet. This complicated mood made her forget to struggle. In front of her great enemy, she actually revealed a delicate expression that only a little girl could have. On the other side, Arthas, who had just been fed a mouthful of dog food, could no longer hold it in. She immediately sent a sword gust over. Unfortunately, he was destined to miss. Duque immediately used instant teleportation and took Cervanus to a different location. Not only did he take away Queen Sylvanus, but he also sent a mental message to Onyxia and Vashti to return to their human forms. A pair of huge hands of magic supported 2 wounded people. Vashti was a little miserable. There was a 10-centimeter-long hole on her flat belly, and the Lich King's frost power was constantly invading her soul and body. If not for Duque's arrival, even if she persisted in the battle, she would have been unable to resist the worsening of her injuries and eventually become a servant of the Lich King. Onyxia was in an even worse state. Vashti could still hold on for the time being, but she could not hold on for much longer. Her right wing was almost chopped off. Even in human form, her entire right shoulder was covered in frost. Coupled with the 2 rather serious wounds on her lower abdomen and thigh, even if she returned to Katrana's appearance, her body could not help but shiver from the extreme cold. For a giant dragon with a demigod body, this situation could be said to be rather terrible. A golden figure walked out of the void behind Duque. Archbishop Alonsus Fail. As an important existence that could restrain evil, Duque did not leave him in the magic net. Instead, he had long brought him with him in the form of a soul host. Even if Arthas had the ability to separate Duque from the magic net, Duque would not lose the Archbishop. As soon as Alonsos appeared, he immediately started treating Onyxia. Master. Mount number 1 lowered its head, not daring to look at Duque. Of course, she knew that it was precisely because she had chickened out at the critical moment that caused the chain of collapse. Duque did not even look at her, and directly threw back a sentence, "Oomph." I'll deal with you later. But remember, when facing an opponent that you cannot defeat, betraying your teammates is the same as betraying yourself. The more you chicken out, the faster you die. Yes. Even though Onyxia was afraid, she knew that this time, she had let it go. Woo-woo. At most, she would just have her scalp whipped or something. It was better than being turned into a corpse dragon. Thinking of the ugly corpses of the Calamity Army, the Black Dragon Princess who loved to look good shuddered. Only towards Vashj, Duque revealed a gentle smile. He did not speak, and just nodded. But this silent exchange was already enough to make Vashj, whose brows were scrunched up due to the pain, reveal a flowery smile. A look of affirmation was enough to make all the hard work and pain she had endured become meaningful. 10,000 years ago, she was just a lowly maid that could be casually given away. She had endured the most chaotic darkness. She had suffered the most cruel abuse. In her most painful and helpless moment, it was Duque who taught her the ultimate transformation spell, which allowed her to preserve the last pure land of her spirit when she was on the verge of collapse countless times. After returning to Duque's side, she had always served Duque with a fanatical attitude and did not hesitate to compromise to please every woman around Duque. She was clearly the leader of a clan, a queen. But in order to repay a debt of gratitude, she placed herself very, very low. As smart as she was, of course, she knew that Servanus's method of fighting would not work. She still helped him without any hesitation, even though she was also heavily injured. Now, she felt that her sacrifices and efforts were all worth it. As long as Duque approved of her, it was enough. Vashj's face revealed a martyr's radiance, and she made a sign with her mouth. Duque recognized it. She was saying, "I will always be your Celia." Duque scratched his head. Everyone says that Vashj is sinister and ruthless? Why do I feel that she is silly and cute? Sure enough, circumstances are the biggest factor that changes a person's character. Shaking his head, he stopped thinking about these things. Finally, Duque stood in front of Arthis. The muscles on Arthis's face twitched. A dead person's muscles should have withered and rotted due to the lack of blood circulation. The surging shadow energy replaced the position of blood, providing every cell in Arthis's body with the activity that only belonged to the undead. If she could, Arthis would have liked to chop Duke in half at the first possible moment. Otherwise, he would have been fed a stomach full of dog food, and it was even the harem brand of dog food. Unfortunately, he could not do it. The second Duque appeared, Duque's attack began. Chapter 1717. At first, Arthis thought that Duque would be like Vashj, fighting with him for control of the surrounding frost elements. If that was the case, he would probably laugh in his dreams. Of course not. Arthis had long regarded Duque as the enemy of a lifetime, naturally because of Duque's glorious past and unusual methods. He also thought that Duque was pretending to take care of his woman and secretly controlling the surrounding elements. As soon as Duque opened his mouth, Arthis knew that he was wrong. Whether it is Nazul or Arthis, they have never been peerless experts. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. If this was the end of the sentence, then it would only be a sentence without any real meaning. The second half of Duque's words caused Arthis' expression to change. Only a Lich King who endlessly absorbs power from his subordinates is a true peerless expert. Almost at the same time as Duque's voice fell, Arthis felt another string in his mind break. Another leader had been defeated? Arthis did not move. Duque had no intention of letting him go. Duque opened his arms, and a huge set of arcane energy was suddenly projected above his head. The first number was 1, separated by a few empty spaces, the second was 9, and after that, the third was more than 10,000, and the fourth went directly to the million level. Apart from the first two sets of numbers, everyone could see that the next two sets of numbers were rapidly counting down. Arthis was not stupid. He immediately understood what these numbers represented. Duque deliberately pointed it out. The Lich King is only a weak existence. Apart from all the connections between you and your subordinates, there are at least 2 digits of existences in the Alliance army that can defeat you. But with so many undying providing you with soul power, anyone who fights with you will be fighting against a large number of undying at the same time. At this time, Duque turned back and glanced at Queen Sylvanas. Sylvanas immediately came to a realization. No wonder she could not defeat Arthas no matter how hard she trained, no matter how hard she tried. Fighting the Lich King meant going head-on against the undead army that numbered more than 100 million. As long as he couldn't kill them instantly, the Lich King could heal himself by absorbing the soul power of his subordinates, no matter how heavily injured he was. On the other hand, as long as the entire Calamity army was destroyed, the Lich King would be a piece of meat on the chopping board. He could do whatever he wanted. Sylvanas's fair face was flushed with shame. Duque adopted a dignified defensive stance. He used the frost elements in his body to create a solid ball of ice that wrapped around himself. Duque smiled faintly. He did not hide his provocation at all. Therefore, every soldier in the coalition army's fight is meaningful. I don't need to do anything. I just need to hold on until the number and quality of your undyings fall below the critical line. Then I can wait until you weaken. When you are so weak that you can no longer withstand my attacks, that will be my victory. Duque opened more live projections of the various battlefields in the Ice Crown Glacier. In the magic mirror, the coalition army was advancing towards the Ice Crown Fortress in an orderly manner. After entering the territory of the Ice Crown Fortress, the coalition army almost leveled their cannons and used close-range shooting tactics to cover the advance of the infantry and tanks. Almost every 100 meters, they would summon the earth elementals under Archavon to reinforce the ground beneath their feet to prevent the spider demons from digging holes and launching sneak attacks. The logistics team first burned the corpses with flames and sprinkled Naru holy water on them, using a destructive method to cut off the Calamity army's escape route. They were also destroying Arthas's source of strength. Unless the Calamity army could obtain corpses faster than the speed at which they were destroyed, Arthas's strength would inevitably decline. What disgusted Arthas was that William seemed to have long known about this secret that only the Lich King knew. After they defeated Lord Malorgar, they directly took away the Shadow Frost fragment from its corpse. That was the mental energy node that he used to control the Calamity army's subordinates. His control over his subordinates was a typical root-like structure. As the branch leader, he controlled the branch leader, who then controlled the elite subordinates, and the elite subordinates, who then controlled the low-level immortals. Now that William and the rest directly destroyed the branch, Arthas couldn't help but be angry for a while. The most abominable thing was Duque, who used the same powerful mental energy to disrupt Arthas's work of bypassing the destroyed leader and rebuilding the mental domination circuit. This series of actions seemed to have been premeditated by Duque. Actually, he had wronged Duque this time. Duque really didn't know that the Shadow Frost fragment was the key to Arthas's energy supply from the Calamity army. He told everyone to remember to collect the Shadow Frost fragment in advance because he knew that when all the Shadow Frost fragment was combined, it could form an awesome divine double-handed axe, the Shadow's Sorrow, which was known to be able to slash anyone and anything it saw. Whether it was a misunderstanding or intentional, it was destined that after today, there would only be one of them left. Arthas laughed. Do you really think that all the heroes that I've specially destroyed can all win? As long as any one of them fails, they will become the new pillars of the Calamity army. By the way, Anastrian has successfully ambushed Naxxramas with the crystal skull that Nazul once used. Even the Red Dragon Queen that you rely on as a backup has been imprisoned by him. Oh? Is that so? Duque was unmoved and said calmly. You just have to pretend to be calm. There's no longer anyone there who can keep Anastrian in check. He will soon kill Gianna and Kale. That's an offer them to me. Do you think that you can have Gianna forever? Before Arthas could finish, Duque interrupted him. Of course, Gianna is mine. Every muscle and every inch of her skin belongs to me. It has nothing to do with you, Arthas. Also, I can make her give birth to children. Can you? With that, Duque glanced at the lower half of Arthas' body with disdain. He thought that after becoming a Lich King, his soul would be completely cold and would no longer have any feelings. Arthas realized that he was wrong, very wrong. It was precisely because he retained the memories of his time as a human that he could not let go of that resentment and hatred. What Duque said was Arthas' eternal pain. Just as he was about to say something, his words were interrupted by Duque again. Do you really think that Fensitter Anastrian has completely lost his own will and will absolutely follow your every order? That cold crystal skull, it's not wrong to call it the skull of the traitor. Chapter 17:18. At this moment, Arthas's expression suddenly changed. No one knew more about that skull than he did. Although that thing could strengthen the mental strength of a normal soul countless times, that was an increase in strength in exchange for endless pain and torture. Nazul was essentially just a cowardly guy. From his experience, he knew that in the face of Jaden's oppression, even if he signed the soul contract, he still did not have the guts to lead the war between the orcs and the Draenei. As a result, his power was stolen by Gul'dan. He shrank back. When the tribe launched the First and Second Wars at the Dark Portal, he hid in his old home in the Moonshadow Valley and became an otaku. If it wasn't for the explosion of Draenor, he would not have dared to lead the tribe to attack Azeroth again. When he failed, all he could think of was to escape. However, why did such a cowardly fellow, who had no ambition at all, dare to raise the flag of rebellion against the powerful Burning Legion after Archimonde knelt and knowing that the Legion still had killed Jaden? It was completely inexplicable. Only Arthas, who had fused with Nazul's soul, knew that Nazul was actually tortured by the Ice Skull. That kind of pain and madness completely exceeded the limit that a normal soul could bear. In order to get rid of this pain that seemed to last forever, he did not hesitate to betray the Burning Legion. In fact, when Arthas put on the Lich King's mask and began to fuse with Nazul's soul, the first difficulty was not the difference between their souls, but Arthas had to appease Nazul's unusually sensitive and restless heart because of the excessive injuries and torture, like a child. Now, Arthas twisted Anastrian's head with a strong momentum and replaced it with this ice skull. Of course, this guy's strength was forcibly raised to the demigod level. The continuous terrifying torture could indeed dispel Anastrian's will to resist. However, going too far was as bad as not going far enough. Arthas's method was destined to not gain loyalty, let alone a former king who was originally arrogant and full of rebellious thoughts. He had betrayed the Scourge once, so he could betray the Lich King a second time. With the rapid destruction of the Scourge soldiers, the weakening of the Lich King's power became inevitable. Right now, he was completely relying on the shadow power accumulated in the Icy Throne to pass his days. If they could not withstand this round of attack and turn the powerful invaders led by Duque into immortals, the Calamity Troop would have to stop here. He understood this, and so did Anastrian. Under such circumstances, would this newly promoted demigod Lich still serve the Lich King with all his might? I don't think so. Arthas subconsciously narrowed her eyes. He knew very well that Duque was trying to drive a wedge between him and Anastrian. The problem was that this was an overt plot. Although he knew that Duque was shameless, he could only accept it. He raised his left hand, and his 5 fingers quickly created a violent winter storm. Grim winter swept towards Duque. Clearly, the Lich King was enraged. With the momentum of this storm, let alone a human, even the largest flying battleship in the Alliance would instantly turn into a lump of ice and crash down. Duque followed his heart very well. Yes, following his heart added up to cowardice. With a stomp of his right foot, an octagonal ice fortress that wasn't considered large rose from the ground. It seemed that Duque had built it as easily as building an Eskimo ice hut. This B***starred actually had the mood to summon Sylvanas, who was originally protecting the other 2 women. She pointed at her shoulder. Come, your man is tired. Give your man a massage. If it was in the past, it would be strange if Queen Sylvanas did not flip the table on the spot. This time, Sylvanas, who knew that she was in the wrong, was like a little wife who had been bullied. She glanced at Arthas in the distance, but still moved her small steps and used the strength of a battering ram to massage someone's back. Stop. Stop. Are you trying to murder your husband? Duque waved ish, and used more magic to stop Arthes's advance as he cursed. Arthes was in no mood to care about Duque at all. A powerful demigod of the same level as him who was deliberately trying to stall for time was also difficult to deal with. After all, he was not a pure magic type. It was impossible for him to completely block Duque's teleportation. While Duque cut off his connection with the Calamity Army one by one, he was also trying hard to find the magic channel of the magic net in the void and find a way to cut it off. This was a classic case of mutual harm. Arthes was also anxious. "Anastrian, how long are you going to stall for? Didn't you report to me that you've already trapped Alexstrasza?" "Sorry, Your Majesty. I've been attacked by Desert's dream unstable." The soul connection was quite unstable. Arthes could clearly feel the condition of this powerful and disobedient subordinate. Overall it was better, but the situation was similar to his. It was also a wonderful state of obtaining an advantage, but it could not be turned into victory. The Sun King was beating up Jaina and Kale, but when he was snatching the magic net, he was strongly disturbed by the Lord of the Emerald Dream. A genuine demigod who was good at spiritual attacks, even long-range attacks that crossed space, could not be ignored. The feeling of wading in a quagmire was terrible. Even if he wanted to blame Anastrian for not doing his part, there was no good reason. That idiot Malygos was finished. This Sun King was the only strong person under him who rarely made a move. The Sun King had also helped him hold off several strong people on the coalition army. Otherwise, if a top person like the Red Dragon Queen attacked Icecrown Fortress, even he would have a headache. Duque clearly had more confidence in the heroes under his command. This was indeed the case. When Arthes spread out his divine sense and focused his attention on the various leaders of Icecrown Fortress, he saw several scenes that made him grit his teeth in anger. In the end, the huge deformed monster's intestines could not withstand the fierce attack of Ashbringer. When Theon patiently accumulated his power of the holy light, he slashed the door-sized sword at the monster for the 10th time, and rotten intestines exploded. Professor Putterseed created a flesh and blood monster that could resist the holy light, but he did not give this monster a soul full of hatred. If it was an evil soul like Arthes or the former Kel, Thazad, it could produce a steady stream of shadow power to better fight Theon. Unfortunately, when Ashbringer cut rotten intestines to the point that it was missing an arm and a leg, the power of rotten intestines was also rapidly declining. In fact, by the 6th strike, the outcome was already decided. Chapter 1719. In front of the frozen throne, Duque was still fighting Arthes on the not-so-big, not-so-small ice platform. The injured Onyxia and Vashch had been sent by Duque to the place where he had just killed Malygos with teleportation. Duque had also solemnly warned the two of them not to touch Malygos' salted fish, corpse. A crazy dragon lich. The lingering sound of its soul might contain unknown destructive power. "If you want to become a fool, go ahead and touch it," Duque said. Duque's warning made Onyxia's body tremble. It would probably be very difficult for this guy to regain his courage. Duque had beaten her down with one hand and subdued her with the other. It was hard to expect this guy to run out and take charge in the future. This was karma. Duque was very reassured by Vashch's words. With Queen Sylvie left, Duque had the capital to hold Arthes back. Mages had always been very awesome. The title of the world's sun was not something that could be obtained by playing around. Originally, Arthes could crush the 3 demigods with his elemental dominance and almost succeeded in killing 3 demigods. Unfortunately, it was not so easy to succeed against Duque. Knowing that his total magic power was far inferior to Arthes's, Duque did not want to waste magic power with the fool. After all, the magic net was like Wi-Fi. When the signal was bad, it would be stupid to compete with the other's wired network. Duque was just wasting time with the fool. One after another, ice prisms that did not belong to Arthes shot out from the ground to block his way. Arthes could use frost to pollute Duque's frost elements, but if he was slightly negligent, Duque would let Alonso's use divine power to purify the elements around him. As long as it was not poisonous, Duque was almost unafraid of the elements. Riding on the invincible Arthes, he was once again blocked by the iceberg summoned by Deity. When Frostmourne split the iceberg, Arthas could not help but curse, "Are you so sure that those mortal heroes will win?" Yeah. Deity shrugged as he cast the spell. "I'm not bragging, but none of your subordinates can fight." His nonchalant and matter-of-fact disdain nearly caused Arthes' lungs to explode with rage. Seeing Arthes seething with anger, Sylvanas, who had been playing the role of support behind Deity, giggled. Deity turned his head and rolled his eyes. "I suddenly realized that you're quite nasty as well. You actually built your own happiness on the enemy's pain." When Deity said this, Sylvanas was stunned. She didn't know how to respond. What was infuriating was that in the next second, Deity, that bastard, changed his expression as well. "But that's what I like about you. Because I'm just this kind of guy. Back then, I snatched Jaina from Arthes' hands, and I felt so good." Deity was pointing fingers at a deer and calling it a horse. It was clearly Jaina who threw herself at him, but he was afraid that Jaina would inherit the fate of being a loner who betrayed her father. She was going to hide on Mars. Oh, Delano. Now that he was talking nonsense, it became that he had taken the initiative to snatch Jaina's dream lover, and he was even showing off as if he had avoided sticking a flower on cow dung. If Arthes were a ball, she would definitely explode in anger this time. Sylvanas, who was at the back, instinctively wanted to scold Deity, but she suddenly realized that Deity was helping her vent her anger. His words woke her up from her dreams. There were many ways to take revenge. Completely destroying the other party was certainly one way. But what about after revenge? Her eldest sister and third sister had advised her more than once that revenge wasn't urgent. Revenge would eventually be completed, and life had to continue. She could take revenge and live happily. This was the greatest revenge for the enemy, and the best consolation for her dead compatriots. Sylvanas said, "I promise you, as long as you destroy Arthes, I will let go of my bigotry and hatred." These words seemed to be out of the blue, but they were exactly what Deity wanted to hear. That's more like it. Do you want me to cheat for you so that you can reach first? Surpass your eldest sister and third sister? Bastard! Destroy Arthas for me first." In the end, Arthes couldn't hold back the disdain that Deity and his wife had for him. Instead of pressing forward, he walked to the center of the void platform and raised Frostmourne high. Deity narrowed his eyes and said solemnly, "Let's retreat to the edge of the floating ice area." Hearing Deity's words, Arthes hesitated for a moment, not knowing if he should use this move. That's right. Only by hiding in the floating ice area on the edge of the platform could he really avoid this killer move. As long as Deity dared to stay in the center, not to mention a demigod like Deity, even if Deity was a true god, he wouldn't be able to survive this move. However, before he made a move, Deity had already seen through everything. Gritting his teeth, Arthes finally stabbed Frostmourne into the center of the platform. Bam! A terrifying wave of ice that seemed to be able to freeze the whole world exploded in all directions with Arthes at the center. Standing in the floating ice area, Deity erected a triangular ice shield in front of him, allowing the ice wave that Arthes created to reach the sky and the ground. When the ice wave hit him, it split in two and swung to the left and right. Under the attack of this extremely cold wave, even though Sylvanas had a demigod body, she still felt the cold invading her body irresistibly. Unconsciously, she hugged Deity tightly. Deity frowned not because of Queen Sylvanas, but because he could tell that the fool was going to go all out. Deity cursed inwardly, "You bastards, hurry up and finish this." This was the disadvantage of playing in an away game. Unless Deity was willing to go all out and crash Naxxramas and the Dalajan into the ice-crowned fortress together, Deity wouldn't be able to get the same amount of magic power and supplies as Arthes. In this world, the greatest thing was called reason. Using a fortress against a fortress, or even a collision, was not something that could be done casually. Deity had taken Naxxramas, and in order to win, Deity could barely do this. But the Dalajan couldn't. Although the Dalajan, which had 2,800 years of heritage, had been torn down by Archimonde once, Duque couldn't reasonably force the Dalajan to crash into the Ice Crown Fortress. Of course, Duque could use his demigod status to force it. Doing so would bury the seeds of conflict. If everyone didn't say it, they would definitely feel uncomfortable, and in turn, it would affect the promotion of the magic net and even the cultivation of talents in the future. Naxxramas was similar. As the Alliance's only purely military aerial fortress, Duque still counted on it to resist the Burning Legion in the future. Chapter 1720. Naxxramas had already suffered enough damage from Frostmourn's wrath. If it collided with it again, this flying fortress that had yet to be repaired would definitely be destroyed. Thus, Duque finally decided to rely on the strength of the mortal heroes to invade the Ice Crown Fortress and cut off the Scourge Army's magic support for Arthas. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Duque was dancing on the edge of a blade. At this point, Duque no longer believed that the goddess of destiny, who he had messed with countless times, would still let fate remain the same. What Duque believed was that this heroic team that had been trained to the point of being extremely elite was the Alliance army that he had painstakingly built to be many times more powerful than it had been in history. At this moment, the allied forces of the Alliance and the Dragon Slumber Shrine were marching rhythmically in all directions around the Ice Crown Fortress. The battle at the front did not stop. The damaged mechanized troops in the middle were being dragged to the rear for repairs, and the injured soldiers were being carried to the rear for treatment in an orderly manner. At the place that had been a battlefield not long ago, the soldiers who had launched the first round of assault had just been replaced. There was no pain or despair on their faces, only confidence and indifference for victory. They followed the military manual that Duque had issued, quietly sipping warm water and eating a little bit of food to replenish their energy in preparation for the second round of battle. In the Ice Crown Fortress, William's team, Magni, and Chandri's, who had long since gotten rid of their opponents, suddenly encountered a large number of Scourge soldiers on the way. What the hell? Weren't there no soldiers just now? Why are there suddenly so many? Magni raised the Balrog hammer and smashed the Scourge soldiers that were charging at him like a game of whack-a-mole. The fire attribute of the Balrog hammer could easily burn those fellows into ashes, and he didn't even need to collect their corpses. This was also because Magni was holding back. Otherwise, his advance would have been several times faster. Idiot, use your stone head to think, Chandri's teased Magni. This adopted daughter of the Whispering Wind family wasn't a gentle elf. An elf that was too gentle wouldn't be able to be an independent general. Oh, what the coincidence! My ancestor was a stone. You said I have a stone brain. That's a compliment to dwarves. Magni was unmoved. He looked like an old man. Actually, she was older than him. Chandri's rolled her eyes. Idiot. They probably didn't want to waste their military strength by not sending out small fries. After all, these fellows aren't even qualified to warm up for us. But now, they're pushing out so many small fries. What do you think they're trying to do? It's just that those who can fight weren't able to hold us back. They're afraid that our hero group will join forces and form a snowball effect. The Dwarf King was never a fool, but he could be a little weird at times. Chandri's figure flashed by quickly. Her moonlight ray easily killed a dozen monsters. Indeed, as soon as they turned a corner, they discovered William and the other two. Great. Varian was the first to wave at them. Is Brawl okay? Magni saw Brawl clutching his abdomen as he followed behind with a pained expression. He didn't participate in the battle. I was heavily injured. I need time to recover. Brawl smiled bitterly. Magni and William looked at each other and made a decision immediately. Valera, follow me. We'll chase after them first, Magni said. General Feathermoon, sorry to trouble you. William stood at the side, looking like he was waiting for them. For the sake of the overall situation, they had to gather their lost comrades as soon as possible. Magni and the blood elf thief Valera would be the first to attack. William wouldn't abandon his brothers, so he stayed behind to take care of Brawl Baremantle until Chandri's finished healing him. Chandri's had no reason to refuse, no matter if it was to save her comrades or to protect her comrades from the hero group. Furthermore, she was the only two priestesses of the moon goddess in the group. Just like how many people would be charmed by Tyrant, who was riding a white tiger and wielding a bow. Many people couldn't tell at first glance that Chandrese was actually a priestess. Gentle white light shone from Chandrese's slender fingers. The healing effect of the moon goddess' divine spell was far superior to that of a druid's spells. It easily healed and regenerated Brawl's organs. Just 3 minutes later, Brawl caught his breath and revealed a relieved expression. "William, I'm fine now. You don't have to take care of me. As long as I don't actively participate in the battle, I should be able to recover to about 80% of my strength before the final battle." Chandrese wiped the sweat from her forehead. "Let's hurry over. I just received a message from that bastard Marcus. Even though he's fine, he hopes that we can hurry." In the hero group, she was the only one who would call Duque a bastard to his face. This was because she couldn't accept that her beautiful and holy adoptive mother, Tyrant, had actually been taken away by that bastard Duque. "Let's hurry." All right. In fact, the battle of the first 8 bosses in the Ice Crown Fortress had ended almost at the same time. Everyone spent a little more time to gather. In the hall on the 5th floor, almost half of the hero group had gathered. In the 4th boss, Death Messenger Salufar, Varrock wasn't able to take down his son by himself. Lord Howl took action and dismembered little Salufar. Yes, in the truest sense of the word. Little Salufar's limbs and waist were chopped off, leaving behind only his chest, neck, and head. If he was alive, he would have died a long time ago. Unfortunately, he was already dead. Even with such severe injuries, he could still move around like a worm. Looking at his son, who had turned into a monster, Varrock was dejected and silent. Only Grum kept comforting him, saying, "Just kill Arthas. Your son will at least come back." The other, heavily injured, Gavinrad went to cut the rotten noodles while being chased by the ooze monsters. In the end, both his buttocks were bitten off. It looked very similar to the logo of a famous brand like Apple. In the end, Gavinrad only managed to take down the rotten noodles with the help of Theon. However, when he shamelessly asked Chandrese for limb regeneration, he was sternly rejected. Strictly speaking, the combination of Elucia and Kalia was due to Kalia's milk, to Professor Putterseed. After wielding the divine weapon, Valinor, Kalia's holy light power increased by more than 10 times. Originally, with Elucia's strength, it would have been impossible for her to deal with the strange professor. Instead, Kalia gave Putterseed a holy light treatment. "You're sick. If you're sick, you need to be treated." A ray of holy light and cure disease was cast, and a mysterious chain reaction occurred. Chapter 1721. The overly powerful holy light worked hard to remove the extremely strengthened aberrated cells in the professor's body. After these cells, which were created using the plague as a blueprint, were stimulated, they began to devour the professor's healthy living cells. What was the result? With a whoosh, the originally thin professor swelled up like a balloon. Ah! The professor became a howling beast, his cries echoing throughout the lab. "He looks like he's in pain. What should I do?" Kalia raised Vern in a daze. "Continue. Since the enemy is unhappy, then we have to do it. Isn't that what Duke has been teaching us all this while?" Elucia was the more assertive one. "Yes. Recover, heal, cure, greater heal, under normal circumstances, using holy light to heal an enemy with the shadow attribute was nonsense. It wasn't that holy light couldn't be used on the enemy, but that form of holy light wasn't as effective as a priest's punish. But the reason why a divine artifact was a divine artifact was that it had extraordinary special effects. Veronel was a top-notch divine artifact that could grant life to inorganic objects. Although its effects would definitely be reduced after recasting, its ability to stimulate the growth of life was coincidentally the nemesis of Putricide's howling beast. Not only were the aberrated cells in his body stimulated, but his muscles, which should have been dead and had rotted to his bones, also showed signs of mutation. The cells of 2 different attributes were stimulated, multiplying thousands of times faster. After Kalia cast her 30th spell, Bang! The professor exploded. The two dainty heroines looked at each other. Does this count as a victory for us? Kalia asked in a daze. You can say so. On the 6th floor of the ice-crowned fortress, Imriel, Vanessa, Lilith, Tyrant, and Riadaline were battling the bloody Queen Lanais. At the start, Imriel was the first to be hit. Perhaps she wasn't strong enough to pose a threat to Lanais, but the bloody queen actually bestowed her with a blood queen's essence. Her hooves were instantly pumped up. She swung her hammer like a windmill, hitting the bloody queen's head until it bled. Even so, Lanais was not annoyed. Instead, she looked at the hoof, liking it even more. Then Hoof felt terrible. How strange, I suddenly crave fresh blood. Can one of you give me a bite? The Hoof's words were naturally treated as a lunatic. Not only was no one willing to pay attention to her, but everyone subconsciously distanced themselves from her. In the end, a negative mind control effect called uncontrollable frenzy broke out. Originally, the Hoof should have lost its mind and become brainless, allowing itself to be controlled by the Blood Queen. As the first disciple appointed by the Prophet Willan after his death, Imriel's willpower was rare in the world. His willpower was unparalleled when it came to protecting his clansmen against evil. As a Hoof who had gone through countless hardships, he managed to forcefully break free from uncontrollable frenzy with his own willpower. When she recovered in the short span of a second, the Blood Queen was stunned and suffered a few more attacks for no reason. Everyone be careful. She can turn people into vampires. If you don't drink blood, you'll be under her control. But if you drink blood, it seems that you'll pass on the vampire ability to the other party. She might bite someone else later. The Hoof was unusually smart. Almost immediately, she revealed the truth of the matter. Turning the opponent into a vampire and having a mental breakdown if he didn't drink blood was the Blood Queen's core skill. If this skill was broken, how could she fight? Then, the Hoof's cleverness was ruined. Since Imriel isn't afraid of being controlled, why don't we all bite Imriel after we get hit? Vanessa immediately thought of a countermeasure. The Hoof's face fell and she trembled. No way. For victory. This is a must. Vanessa's expression was serious and brooked no refusal. Then, I've been hit, Imriel, Laedeline shouted. This time, it was her arm that was bitten. It's me this time. Hoof, come here, Vanessa shouted. Can I not come? A thief was resolute. This time, it was her shoulder that was bitten. In a tense situation, those who hadn't become vampires before would not have any experience. Most of them were ruthless. After a few rounds, the Hoof was traumatized by the bite. This fellow actually decisively changed into a more sturdy set of armor just before the battle. It was Tyrant's turn. The Hoof shook her hand and shook her head. Although the chicken blood from the Blood Queen had greatly increased her attack power, it was still too painful to be bitten every time. This time, the Hoof decisively came to a conclusion. Your Excellency Whisperwind can bite others. Isn't it better to increase everyone's attack power? Please forgive me for refusing. And you won't have anywhere else to bite. The Hoof wagged her tail proudly. In her glee, she forgot that her blue tail was only protected by two pitiful metal rings. The agile Tyrant pounced forward and bit Adreniai's tail. No, it's too sensitive there, I will. It was a sorrowful cry mixed with a special meaning. Then, perhaps out of mischief, every heroine that was hit by the Blood Queen's essence chose to bite Imriel's tail when they had no choice but to bite someone. 2 minutes later, the Blood Queen was defeated. Everyone was very happy. Only a sobbing Hoof was left, sitting on the ground as if she had been toyed with. Sob, 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 I can't get married anymore. At this moment, in front of the ice throne, Arthas's expression was even worse. Half of the Scourge leaders he had carefully selected had fallen, leaving only the unreliable Anastrian in a stalemate and a green dragon dream treader, Velisria. This green dragon was not a member of the Scourge army. She was just a green dragon that had been captured by the Scourge army. She was trapped in the Frostwing Hall of Ice Crown Fortress, unable to move. In order to save the Dreamwalker, The Alliance's heroes only needed to heal her from paralysis to full health under the obstruction of the Scourge soldiers. Then, everything would be fine. It was not an exaggeration to say that all obstacles on Arthas's path to destruction had been cleared. Arthas had just used Frostmourne's fury, but it did not hurt Duque at all. Admittedly, the overall power of this level of ultimate skill was quite shocking. If it was used to attack a large fortress like Naxxramas, it would definitely be able to take it all. But as an attack against a single target, this kind of explosive attack with an area of effect did not have enough energy density. Chapter 1722. In fact, Arthas was already very careful, trying hard to focus on the direction of Frostmourne's fury. His helplessness lay in the fact that this move was formed by the negative energy generated by the anger and wails of billions of wronged souls. The anger of the souls was always varied, some high and some low. Even as a Lich King, it was difficult for him to perfectly integrate the negative energy generated by billions of wills. This made it exponentially more difficult to control this ultimate move. At most, he could decide the general direction of the pour, but he couldn't decide the energy density of this move. Duque, who had already studied and analyzed this move thoroughly, seized the opportunity. He first used True Mirror Image to trick Arthas into attacking the south, and then he shamelessly used Atish as support to forcibly teleport Queen Sylvanas to the north. Because it was a full-range attack, Duque still had to take some of the power of the fury of the wronged souls. But compared to taking it all in from the front, the pressure that Duque, who was on his back, was on the same level as an itch. Queen Sylvanas lay on Duque's back and giggled, which was rare. "Duque, I find that I love you more and more. I love the way you make Arthas gnash her teeth in frustration, yet there's nothing she can do about it." Duque bared his teeth and thought to himself, "I didn't expect that such a stubborn person like Queen Sylvanas would one day become a bystander who only knows how to cheer 666. Did I lead her astray?" However, at this moment, Duque was simply a model of a righteous hero. On the other hand, Arthas's white hair looked extremely messy. It just happened to confirm the saying, "A defeated army is like a collapsed mountain, and there is no way out." After withstanding this ultimate move, Duque pointed at Arthas with the head of his drumstick. "Arthas, you're finished." Arthas didn't need Duque's reminder to know that things were not good. With the fall of all the leaders under him, the Calamity Army, which was a towering tree, had most of its roots cut off. Of course, he had been trying to repair the roots since just now. What he did was no different from patching. If it was just one or two holes, he might be able to fix it. However, the Calamity Army was already a basket full of holes. How could it be mended? In his perception, the number of soldiers of the Calamity Troop was still dropping like a cliff. At this moment, the monitor above Duque's head clearly indicated that the total number of Doomsday Troop soldiers had fallen below 100,000. The hateful Allied forces had all become skilled in dealing with the Undying. Not to mention the Calamity Army that had lost their unified command and only had their instincts left. Even if the Calamity Army had a commander, they would still launch tactics such as decapitation tactics or infantry cannons to advance step by step to weaken the Calamity Army. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that there was no way to fight this battle. However, "I'm finished? I'm not done yet." Arthas suddenly perked up, as though she had been injected with some kind of expired chicken blood. She didn't know if it had any effect, but in any case, her aura had risen. He let out a heroic roar, his white eyes turning bloodshot because of the surging shadow energy. "As long as I kill you, I will kill you. That's right. As long as I kill you, Duke Marcus, I will be able to turn the tables." Faced with Arthas's roar, Duque rubbed his eyebrows in an extremely pretentious manner. Have I ever told you that the top 10 misconceptions in life is, I can kill you?" Pfft. Obviously, Duque's words were all unreliable and venomous, but in the ears of Queen Sylvanas, it became a famous saying. Not only was it full of domineering, but it was also very satisfying. Queen Sylvanas once again burst out laughing without any restraint. This was not the end. Duque shrugged and looked forgetful. I forgot that you are not a human anymore. Perhaps you can make an exception? An exception? I don't need an exception. Arthes was interrupted halfway through her sentence. Do you think you still have an Astrian? Duque's face was full of mockery. Arthes's heart turned cold. He also knew that his mentality was very much like that of a gambler. He knew that betting was not reliable, but he always deluded himself into thinking that he could turn the tables. Who knew that he would lose everything? This time, even Queen Sylvanas spoke, her mockery even more obvious. Don't be silly. We know an Astrian better than you do. He will only stand on the side of the winner. When Sylvanas said this, even Duque felt that fate was really strange. Ever since he had transmigrated, many people who should have died in history had survived under his influence. Although not all of them were very happy, at least they had a much better ending than the original bitter ones. However, there was an exception like an Astrian. Originally, in history he had led all the members of the Silver Moon Council to fight against Arthes in the third battle of the Dark Portal, and in the end, all of them died in battle. He and the council had all kinds of arrogant and even corrupt lifestyles. But at the last moment he did not escape, did not abandon his people, and could be considered to have fulfilled his duty and died for his country. The Sun King might not be considered a hero, but he should at least be a character with a neutral rating. However, such a character, perhaps provoked by Duque's abduction of the Windrunner family, was forcibly turned into a villain. Queen Sylvanas was right. In this life, an Astrian could voluntarily become a lich to protect himself when the Scourge army was strong, and would betray the Lich King and become the leader of the Forgotten when the Lich King declined. He would definitely not mind betraying the Scourge army again. Moreover, this time he had a very good excuse. At the same time, in the teleportation hall of Naxxramas, a Nastrian knelt in front of the Red Dragon Queen who had broken out of the cage. Please forgive me, the sinful me. My soul was forcibly controlled by the will of the Lich King. I can't control myself. Please grant me destruction. Hurry. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can no longer control myself and will hurt you. The Alliance is the best ally of the Horde. Jaina's eyes were full of contempt. She did not believe a word of the Sun King's words. Beside her, Kale, that was silent, but his tightly clenched fists betrayed the excitement and anger in his heart. Kale, that was never a fool, and he instantly understood why. Because of this, he felt even more humiliated. Again. If Jaina was in charge at this moment, and she had the ability, she would definitely destroy the Sun King on the spot. Unfortunately, the person in charge here was Alexstrasza, one of the most important existences in the Alliance army. And in terms of alignment, she was definitely in the good lawful alignment. Chapter 1723. As the head of the dragon aspects that guarded planet Azeroth, Alexstrasza was particular about rules and responsibilities. Even though her expression was not much better, she still chose to accept a Nastrian's surrender. It's always a good thing that you can control yourself and wake up again. But to prevent you from causing damage, I'll lock you up before I defeat the Lich King. Sinner and Nastrian Sunstrider, no objections. The Sun King bowed his unusually eye-catching ice crystal head deeply. With a thought from the Red Dragon Queen, dozens of green vines grew out of the void and bound the Sun King tightly like shackles. On the other side, a small teleportation door suddenly opened in the void, and a green dragon scale flew out, landed on his forehead, and stuck to it. That was Isra's dragon scale to suppress his mental strength that was likely to go berserk. Leave him to me for the time being. Isra's soft female voice came from the void. The Red Dragon Queen decided. Just as the Sun King was about to be dragged into the prison of the Emerald Dream, the Sun King was shocked to find that his son had walked in front of him. He raised his head in a daze. From his son's fiery red boots, to the familiar gold-lined red robe, and then to the familiar yet unfamiliar face, the Sun King suddenly trembled. Even Jaina looked at Kale, that's curiously. Who was usually gentle and elegant, roared angrily, Anastrian, you are the common shame of the high elves and the blood elves. You are also my shame. You don't deserve the great surname, Sunstrider. But, in the name of the current head of the Sunstrider family, I announce that you have been stripped of the title, Sunstrider. Are you convinced? This scene made Jaina so happy that she was dancing and applauding. Relief. Too much relief. Anyone with a brain would know that Anastrian had once again become an opportunist. If the Scourge leader in the Ice Crown Fortress were to kill the members of the Alliance hero group, it would snowball. No matter what, this guy would kill Jaina, Kale, and the others, using more heads as a gift to the Lich King. It was a pity that the Alliance hero squad was too strong. Not only had none of them died in battle, but they had even managed to annihilate almost all of Arthesa's subordinates. After failing to steal the weave, Anastrian pretended to be entangled by Isra and surrendered when the opportunity presented itself. He was shameless, but Kale, wasn't polite either. If it had been any other time, Anastrian could have pretended to be the leader of the tribe and ignored Kale, It just so happened that Kale, had intercepted him at this critical juncture, which made him very uncomfortable. Now that he had been labeled as a capricious person, if he didn't tuck his tail between his legs, he wouldn't be able to cry even if Kale, killed him now. With all of his power sealed, he was now no different from the weakest skeleton soldier. His entire body was trembling, but he couldn't find any reason to retort. I was ambushed by the Lich King Arthas, and then my mind was forcibly controlled. I am your father. Before he could finish, Kale interrupted him coldly and sternly. Shut up. I, Kales, once had a father, but my father betrayed his people and his son, and despicably chose to end his own life. From that moment on, I no longer had a father. The one standing in front of me is just a despicable lich with the same name. Finally, I'll ask you one more time, if I strip you of the surname, Sunstrider, are you willing? Anastrian said the word, I, 3 times in a row, but he couldn't continue. The surname Sunstrider was too important. If he kept it, he might be able to use this name to tempt powerful magic elves who were at the end of their lives to be of use to him. He really couldn't bear to give it up. Kale sneered. Ha! You can't bear to? Then, in the name of the patriarch of the Sunstrider family, I'll grant you, an existence who has insulted the name of the Sunstrider, complete destruction. With that, Kale really did accumulate a basin-sized fireball in his hand. Alexstrasza, who was next to him, wanted to stop him, but she just raised her hand and put it down again. She was the guardian of the rules. Since the rules did not allow her to reject the Sun King's surrender, she also had no reason to refuse Kale's execution of the family law. As long as Anastrian was still in the Sunstrider family, Kale had the right to kill him. In the end, this was just a means to force him to leave. Seeing that the Red Dragon sister next to him had no intention of interfering, Anastrian finally gave up. From today onwards, I'm just Anastrian. The voice of his soul was full of coldness and unconcealable hatred. He even hated his own son. Kale flicked his sleeves and left. In the end, a sentence was cast from the fiery red back. I will inform all the leaders of the tribe of this decision as the Dalajan Kirin Tor chairman. If the Sun King still had lungs to use, his lungs would have expanded rapidly and he would have exploded on the spot. However, he could not do anything because among the back that his son had left him, there was an even more majestic and insurmountable blue back, the back of Duke Marcus. As long as Duque supported Kale, he could not do anything at all. As his whole body trembled, he was slowly submerged by the green liquid from the Emerald Dream on the void platform of the Ice Throne. Duque received a telepathic message from Alexstrasza. Sorry, I was unexpectedly entangled by that guy. Now that it's settled, do you need help on your side? I don't think so. Besides, my people still have a grudge with Arthas to settle, Duque replied calmly. Really? Free work. The Red Dragon sister had a hidden meaning in her words. A Lich King who has lost his subordinates is like a grasshopper without legs. He won't be able to jump around for long. Aren't you just thinking about snacks? I won't give you less. Of course, if it doesn't work, I'll call for help. Duque laughed. The red dragon sister, who had her thoughts seen through, blushed and shamelessly said, I remember. I want snacks. Different types? At least 100 types. If they're not delicious, I won't accept them. All right. Duque turned off the telepathic communication and looked at Arthas, who had a very bad expression. I think these people will be very eager to see you. Duque raised his hand and activated the space-breaking power of Itish. A few figures that Arthas was familiar with stepped out of the portal. Chapter 1724. Gavin Rad Misfortune. Other than Uther, the other 4 of the 5 Silver Sages were actually half of Arthes's master. In this life, during Arthes's childhood, the 5 sages basically taught him with the strictest attitude. Only Gavin Rad, the unreliable general of Stormwind, appeared strict on the surface, but secretly encouraged him to push his own maid. It could be said that Gavin Rad was one of the few places that he had a safe haven in his childhood. Tyrion Fordring, another of the 5 Silver Sages. In a sense, he was very similar to Uther. If Uther was a perfect role model, then he was the symbol of excessive tolerance. Before he disappeared with Karazhan, he was tolerant and compassionate towards many people, even opposing the enslavement of the orcs. If these 2 people, who were both teachers and friends, made Arthes feel uncomfortable, then the next person was the one that Arthes did not want to meet at all. Queen Kalia Menethil, the most gentle and kind sister to him. During his harsh and difficult childhood, she was the only safe haven for his soul, the one and only salvation. When faced with his father, Tyrrhenus, who had always treated him rudely, he did not hesitate to stab his sword into his chest. If it was Kalia standing in front of him at that time, not to mention hesitating, he was afraid that he would have knelt on the spot and begged for his sister's forgiveness. After all, the other reason he hated his father in this life was because his father forced his sister to die. Who knew that his sister did not die? In order to escape his father's persecution, she faked her death with Duque's help and ran around the world. When he killed his father and master, his sister suddenly came out and announced that his self-proclaimed title of king was invalid, and she became the queen of Lordaeron. This result at least made him lose half of the reason he had to kill his father. Everything he did after that was more like a mistake on top of a mistake, and he had no choice but to go all the way. Now that he saw his sister, Arthes felt very conflicted. I should have sent people to capture her, and then let you kill her yourself. The one who spoke was the other me in Arthes's soul. This me, of course, was Nizul. Almost as soon as Kalia appeared, Arthes felt that the 2 souls that had merged perfectly in his body were showing signs of splitting again. Another voice in his heart immediately warned him sternly, "Idiot! Don't be distracted. You can no longer go back. You are no longer Korea's naive brother. You've already fallen. You've killed your father, your master, and the thousands of soldiers and civilians of the Rotterdam kingdom. Do you think you can return to your past glory? You are a demon king whose hands are stained with the blood of humans. Yeah, there's no going back," Arthes told herself. Ever since his sister had disappeared 5 years ago at the Door of Darkness, it had been 21 years since he had last seen her. Kalia was still that elegant and peerless sister. Of course, he knew that Duque had given his sister eternal life and youth. That pure beauty was forever fixed at the age of 16, the age when his sister was the most beautiful. Time and age had lost all meaning to his beloved sister. Kalia, who was wearing a priest's robe, saw Arthas take off his helmet. Looking at that familiar yet strange face, the thousands of words in her heart were all stuck in her throat. Her mouth squirmed for a long time, but she couldn't say a single word. Behind Kalia, even more Alliance heroes stepped out of the portal. Feeling the atmosphere, everyone silently stood to the side, leaving time for this noble and fateful pair of siblings. After a long, long time, Kalia finally raised her head. The corners of her eyes were already full of tears. "Arthas, are you doing well?" It sounded a bit nonsensical, But this was the condensation of a sister's more than 20 years of longing for her brother. It had nothing to do with identity, status, or life and death. This was the purest familial love. Inside the Lich King's body, another voice that was exactly the same as Arthas screamed, "Don't answer. You will be weak." Arthas raised his head. "I'm not doing well. Not good at all. And I think today is the day of my destruction." In just 3 short sentences, he expressed his sorrow. He poured out the entanglement, depression, and pain of a lost soul. In his body, the voice had already begun to change. It was no longer like Arthas. It began to change back to Nuzul's voice. "It's over. Everything is over. Arthas, you idiot." Idiot? Maybe. If I wasn't so stupid, I might have been able to see through Nuzul's plot. Perhaps I wouldn't have fallen. Perhaps today, I would be standing in front of you with a glorious identity and crusade against the Lich King, Nuzul. Arthas said this openly. In the ears of the Alliance's powerhouses, it was a bit confusing. But he was confessing, and also saying it for Nuzul to hear. From the beginning to the end, his fall was not voluntary. He fell into the trap set by Nuzul and Kel, Thuzad. That was why he fell step by step. At this moment, Arthas seemed to see a paladin in golden armor standing beside his sister. The paladin was young and handsome. He had the same charming blonde hair as his sister, and a handsome face that was popular with thousands of girls. He was the glory of Lordaeron, the future of his motherland. "Idiot. You think too much. If you don't kill Tyreenas, you will never be able to see the light of day." The soul that had begun to split into Nuzul sharply mocked Arthas' soul. This time, even the Alliance's heroes heard the strange voice that floated out from the Lich King's body. Tyrion and Gavin Rad, the 2 old men who had been active on the battlefield since World War II, recognized it immediately. Nuzul's voice. That's right. Everyone was shocked. On the other side, Arthas did not feel anything from Nuzul's words. Is that so? Maybe. Kalia moved. Unknowingly, tears had already flowed down her beautiful face like a broken dam. She slowly walked to Duque's side and nestled against Duque's chest. "Arthas, it's not too late. The Alliance has now accepted the Death Knights. Not long ago, Darian Mograine and his Black Blade Knights were officially recognized as legal in the Alliance." Kalia turned her head and looked at Duque. "Duque, if Arthas surrenders, can you pardon him?" Kalia's words caused a commotion among the Alliance's leaders. Pardon? What kind of joke was that? During the 15 years of the Dark Portal, the Scourge army had ravaged the entire Lordaeron continent, sweeping through many kingdoms including Lordaeron, Kuul Salis, Stromgard, and many others. They had killed so many kings, slaughtered millions of civilians, and dug up the ancestral graves of countless families. If Arthas, the main culprit, could be forgiven, then you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.